Hello again, friends, and you are our friends, and welcome back to another episode of Jim Cornette's Drive Thru right here, wherever you are on this Tuesday, as this show debuts this week. We are back on Monday next week. Let's get that out of the way right here at the top of the show. I am your host, the great Brian Last, and of course the man joining me who will be answering your questions, which are sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com, or even sometimes on Twitter, using the hashtag CornyDriveThru, the exalted one of the cult of Cornette, Mr. Jim Cornette.
Bravo! Bravo! You were wonderful.
Oh.
You were wonderful.
Well, thank you, sir.
You were wonderful, Brian. You were wonderful. I'm going to be German today. You were wonderful. I sound like Colonel Klink. Or possibly Sergeant Schultz. You were wonderful and wunderbar. And it's a wonderful day. A wonderful day in the neighborhood. Because I'm in a good mood because I have just watched a masterpiece of physical combat. And we're going to get to talk about that today. Plus, you did a great introduction, and also you did the programming notes so that I wouldn't have to later on, and we're going back to the normal schedule for the drive-thru next week. So that wonderful. Excellent, Brian.
Well, thank you.
Now, this is your show. Do the rest of it.
Well, I was going to say, thankfully, I know that you watched a Walter match, because if not, as a nice Jewish boy from Long Island, I would have gotten a bit worried about this German accent all of a sudden permeating the show.
No, those fun-loving Germans from the Hogan's Heroes days probably wouldn't fly on television today. But no, should we just come out with it? Should we just come out with it because we're giddy? We're giddy after having seen this thing. Should we just talk about the big match? I can't pronounce poor Ilja Kuryakin, for the Man from U.N.C.L.E. fans out there, but Ilja and Walter on NXT UK. So many initials, so many letters. Should we talk about it here?
Well, let me just say, we heard from a lot of people. We mentioned it the other day, you and I off air, we were talking. I said, I've heard from a few people who said they want to hear you talk about this match. And then since that time, we've been flooded with requests on Twitter, which I know you see, and then going through the drive-thru email, I was shocked how many people requested you talk about this match, because usually if something big happens on NXT, there's maybe, I kind of know what the audience will be for people requesting you talk about NXT. This is NXT UK. It's kind of under the radar when it comes to even NXT. And we have been flooded.
A subsidiary of NXT even.
That's right. And considering the UK is about to go into shutdown, I don't know if we're going to be seeing it for a while. But I can't think of the last match that got this kind of reaction from the listeners. I did not expect this. We've received countless emails and tweets about this.
Well, here's the thing. I don't know how people are finding it, but I'm happy they're finding it. And as soon as I watched it earlier, it's still fresh in my mind. I tweeted that for all the people talking about pro wrestling has to evolve and pro wrestling has evolved and pro wrestling has to modernize. Well, this is what it could have evolved to if it hadn't been commandeered, taken over, co-opted, or otherwise run into the ground over the last 20 years by comedy writers and backyard cosplayers. This was brilliant. And the evolution thing again it's so ridiculous when you have guys doing everything but sticking lit candles up their asses and running around playing fucking hopscotch in the middle of the ring on one national program, and then the major company that operates this little subsidiary that just put on this classic, this Oscar winner, has fucking Judge Judy and People's Court mashups on their network cable program in this country and all this other tomfoolery and shenanigans. And right under their nose is what, and not everybody, many people, especially today, can't do that match or this kind of match or this style of match. But this is what worked combat, which is what wrestling may not be now, but always has been, could have evolved to. Before we even talk about the match, I'll get this off at the top of the hour here. I know what they were doing here. And they were so good at it. Let me say first, I've always been a fan of Walter's. This was the best match I've ever seen him have. The best example of what he does that nobody else is doing in this business these days, which is concentrating on the worked combat aspect of it, concentrating on what works for him, what he should and shouldn't do, regardless of what he's athletically capable of. He works like he should work, and he's brilliant at it. And Ilja, I was prepared not to like because of the spasticness of his entrance and his facials when he was just over the top, ready to have a stroke. And I'm like, how's this guy going to last through this match? He looks like he should be blown up already. And also there was the weight, the size and height and weight difference. But Ilja got over with me because he's damn good at this too. And
he sold that this was a struggle so well.
Yes. That's the whole, they are struggling. They are competing. And it's not like, for anybody who said, well, we don't want to see that boring stuff that looks real. This was not boring. I was popping all over the place, and I would think anybody else that watched this would be too. And that's what I can't understand, why when they see something like this and they see what wrestling could be, and then they prefer guys puttering around the ring on fucking play school motorbikes. So anyway, Walter and Ilja got over with me. Walter was already over with me. And as I said, it was such a masterpiece and so well done that I hate to pop the bubble on any of the magic that they did to diminish it in any way. But I'm not going to, except to say that this was not only the best modern wrestling match I've ever seen of any style, but it was the safest match I've seen in a long time. And go ahead and ask me why I say that and say, what?
Yeah, I did not expect to hear you say that. Why do you say it's the safest match you've seen in a long time?
Because these guys, obviously they're friends. This is not new. We'll talk about it in a minute. The concept of what they did is not new in wrestling. As a matter of fact, it's so old it's new. It hadn't been done in so long, people don't understand what they're doing. First of all, I assume they're friends. If not, they at least have a healthy respect for each other. And they had a gentleman's agreement that they were going to work stiff. And they knew what they were going to do before they went in and did it. And they agreed to it. And I will say the only thing that I don't like is the face slaps. They're impressive looking, especially with Walter's big paws. But there's a high margin of error, which is why old Ilja had the bloody mouth, which also can cause hearing damage if you catch the ear, especially at that volume. So I'm not a fan of the face slaps, but still I know what they were doing. And the point is, these guys are so good. Let me just say this. These guys are so good that everything that they did looked legitimate, but of any modern match that I've seen in a long time, and actually of any match I've ever seen on AEW television, ever, involving anybody, there was less risk of serious injury in this match than any of those. Serious injury. Because they were working stiff and they're good at it. They were laying a lot of shit in. And they were marking each other up. But especially because Walter is so big and he has mastered the art of laying hands on people and putting holes on people and making it look fucking convincing. But to a trained eye, I know what he's doing. And yes, I'm not saying that old Ilja wasn't feeling him and he wasn't there. But he was in control, even when he was power bombing him, when he was doing whatever the fuck. He was in control of the guy enough. Everything is a risk in wrestling. You can get hurt doing anything, as we've seen with the grasshopper leg guy. But this was controlled violence by two really good fucking guys that have the concept of how to work a conflict They were laying shit in safe places and sometimes in unsafe places because there were some live rounds. There were some potatoes. But nobody was going to get fucking their neck broken. Nobody was going to have a knee torn out. Nobody was going to have spinal issues. Nobody. I don't want either one, but I would rather Walter do everything to me that he did in that match to Ilja, just like he did it, rather than fucking let one of those fucking cosplay goofs on AEW come off the top rope with a triple Lindy and cave my face in with one of their knees or their ass, or do a dive myself over the top rope and trust that I'm going to be caught and safely deposited somewhere by a bunch of fucking midgets.
And it's not even just them. We just saw Ridge Holland go down catching, Oney Lorcan.
And I would not want to be one of the catchers of these fucking flying Walendas either. I'm saying that Walter and Ilja were professionally in control of what they were doing as much as you could be of a contest like that. There was no unprofessionalism. There was no recklessness. They knew what they were doing, stiff as it was, and they both feel it for some time. But nothing was out of control. And we've talked about Walter has the big paws, which are brilliant for the chops. And I'll say this, without revealing too much of his magic. He could chop you half as hard as he was hitting Ilja, but in a different way, and it would hurt worse. And they have mastered, when skin meets skin and it's very flat and sweaty, it sounds fucking fabulous. And all those fucking marks, especially on Ilja, but fucking Walter had, because he's pale and German. That shit will heal, but without surgery. This was never supposed to be ballet and a fucking performance of goddamn, as I said, the flying Walendas, doing the gymnastics and the triple Lindies and everybody just getting a chance to play. This is supposed to be fighting and combat and guys mad at each other and beating each other up under whatever the fucking rules and or stipulations are at the given time and era. This is what wrestling could have evolved into. Walter would have I've been reading, and we're going to talk about this on the experience coming up at some point when I finish these books and we get him lined up. Scott Teal's done some great historical stuff. And especially on Amarillo and Knoxville. He did Nashville earlier. And I can see Walter being one of these guys in Amarillo in the 30s before Dory Funk Sr. even got there, when it was Cal Farley and the original Dutch Mantell, those salty old shooters that whipped everybody's ass for real and then worked with each other and made all the money. You could bring a fucking guy that looks like this in. As a matter of fact, if I had a father that was a billionaire, and I had pretty much unlimited funds at my disposal to start a new wrestling promotion, one of the first things that I would have done would have been figure out how to get a hold of him, Mr. Walter, and find out when his deal was up and offer him $5 or $10 million for the next several years to be a top heel of a evolved wrestling program that would look something like we just fucking saw. Not completely, but in large part. Because that's the kind of guy you could build and I assume he doesn't want to move to the United States. Pre-pandemic. They've not brought him over here. They've not backed the Brinks truck up. He's not really main roster WWE style. But I would have figured out, if I had finances at my disposal, what it would take to get him over here on national television and push this guy to the fucking moon. Anyway, by the way, did you see the referee, the fine referee, the only person in the program with no English accent?
Yeah, I did notice that.
None other than Chris Sharp, OVW alumni, one of the best referees in the business. We actually had one of the best referees in the business down here in OVW several years back. But anyway, I popped when Walter hit the splash off the top rope. Not only did I pop because it looked so convincing, but they worked the whole match up till then. Nobody came off the top rope, and nobody missed it because there was no reason for either one of them to have done that, and you weren't even thinking about it. And then suddenly this big fucking 300-pound fucker's coming off the top rope or going to the top rope. And holy shit. And I thought, Ilja was probably going to move. No, he hit it. Boom. And it meant something. Anyway, I don't understand why that anybody doesn't understand that to evolve something doesn't mean changing it completely, losing the plot on the original idea of the whole thing, and making it not resemble at all what it once was. That would be, instead of man from the apes, that would be man from fucking... What would it be? I'm so frazzled I can't form a cogent simile. It would be man from a fucking giraffe.
Don't you think it would have been better if after the match, Walter went in the back and started dancing to some techno music? See, that's the difference between what we just saw and what we see on American Wrestling TV. This was serious. It was presented seriously. You can get into it as an athletic contest. This was excellent.
If they wanted I loved it also when they were trash talking each other in German, I guess, although the other guy's Russian. I don't know what they were fucking talking. And that's the point. It was great. I've thought for a minute, well, hell, they could go ahead and just call some spots. But then I thought, well, shit, this is on the internet. Somebody's going to speak German or Russian somewhere. But the trash talking in their individual language was great. But that's the point I was going to make, was that you haven't lost the entire plot of what this is supposed to be, but at the same time, this was modern. This was updated. This was, especially a guy like Ilja, at his size, he probably wouldn't have been given a top spot years back. But you can see Walter in any era. That's where I was going with that. But anyway, on a side topic, can we do a side topic yet?
Yes, we can.
All right. I got one of the comments on Twitter, because I got deluged also, was Meltzer's Uncle Dave's comment. Somebody had said, well, Walter would got over in the territories or in the days gone by or whatever, in any era, however it was phrased. And he had to say, well, but no, the big stars of days gone by wouldn't work with him like that. He'd have to change his style. They wouldn't take it or whatever. God damn it. For one thing, this shows how, unfortunately, little Uncle Dave has picked up about the actual execution performance of the in-ring product rather than just watching the in-ring product. For one thing, a lot of the big stars of 2020 wouldn't take that style either, and he'd have to change it. And he'd be right too, and so would they, because it's not their fucking thing. Even serious wrestlers, not everybody can work this fucking style. So, but Walter wouldn't have to change his basic presentation. They would just not have the gentleman's agreement they were going to work that stiff, but he's still going to hit the chops, which is nothing new. And I hearken back to Wahoo McDaniel and Johnny Valentine, which, if Ilja was a little bigger and a little older and crustier, would have been the prehistoric wrestling equivalent of what they just did here. Everybody in Greensboro, everybody in the Carolinas, everybody in Texas, everybody where they worked would say, oh my God, after 40 years, I can still hear those chops landing in the back row of the bleachers, because Wahoo and Valentine were doing the same thing, only they They didn't update it. This was even more fucking, what would you say? It wasn't more violent than Wahoo and Valentine, but there was more action because the whole pace of everything was slower back then, but the gist of it was the same. This is the evolution of that. They're hitting each other hard and fucking throwing some live rounds, but in hopefully safe places most of the time. Nobody's going to be fucking in the hospital for fucking surgery. Maybe, you know, a little fucking IV of goddamn fluids after a performance like that. Or 15 years later, Ric Flair and Ronnie Garvin. Flair and Garvin, I watched them every night have the chop fest. They weren't standing there going, chop me, no chop me. They were going out and having those stiff matches that Ronnie Garvin liked to have, where they were working stiff and had an agreement that this shit was going to get laid in safe places, and Ric Flair wasn't going to let anybody out chop him, and Flair did the backhand knife edge, and Garvin did the right hand overhand, and they worked every night for weeks. They were chopping both guys, mostly Flair, to be honest. Mostly Flair's chest was bleeding because I think the overhand is easier to do that than the fucking knife edge. But Flair'd come back with his chest bleeding. Ronnie Garvin come back with his chest fucking purple and black and blue. And it got to the point where Flair was putting antibiotic cream on his fucking chest because Ronnie had chopped so many layers of skin off of the top of his chest that he was scabbing, and the doctor said it might get infected. But did he say lighten up? No, because he was having fun. It was a goddamn deal. And those people could hear those fucking blows land in the back of the bleachers, and they were making some people respect the wrestling business because they were seeing it in front of them.
Based on everything I know, Johnny Valentine would have loved to work with Walter.
Oh yeah, my God! And he would have been the one saying, "Hit me harder,
Yeah,
keep
that's
coming."
right.
That was his fucking deal, and he coined the phrase that the funkster, good old Terry, stole. I can't make them believe wrestling is real, but I can make them believe I'm real. So the point is, I'm sorry, Uncle Dave, but a lot of guys, a lot of big stars in the business would work with Walter today without altering his style much, maybe lightening up on some of the chops, but everything was safe. They would rather work with this guy, especially if he was being pushed and was in a top spot where they could draw money instead of some of the reckless goofballs that they might be having to work with these days, where you never know what's coming and you never know how you're going to get dropped and you never know who's going to land on you. And we're seeing it. It's not like I'm making this up. We see it every week. How many times was there 2 or 3 people knocked out on live television on AEW that time a week or two ago? When the one guy, they just drug him to the corner and worked around him.
Yeah, there were 2 guys messed up on that show, and then apparently they taped AEW the next night, and there was a women's match that didn't make air because one of the women in the match got seriously injured, and they couldn't air it.
That's what I'm saying. I'm in no way disrespecting not only the effort, the work, and the way that it felt. That was a fucking war. But those guys were pros. They knew what they were doing. They agreed to it beforehand. Everything was safe and responsible. And, once again, besides a pandemic, if Walter is not one of the major stars on their main roster in this country, then it's only because he doesn't want to move to this fucked up country. Apparently, I would think, because I'd break the fucking bank to fucking get this guy over here. They don't need Brock with this guy. And Walter's brand new. They've seen Brock for 20 years. This guy's even bigger of a fucking prick. Just look at that face and his attitude and the whole 9 yards. I was so happy that somebody has actually gotten this and what this is supposed to be, because even the most noted of wrestling observers apparently don't understand what they were doing, and that there's more people than that would be happy to work with Walter as long as they could. As long as they were pushing him where they could make some money with him. That's the worst thing is this is on a goddamn show. I couldn't even hardly find it on the network. You had to tell me how to look it up. And this blew anything away that we've seen on American television in months and months and months and years and years.
You know, to your earlier point, other than some stuff I've seen in recent years with headbutts, which I'm not a big fan of.
No.
I think clearly there have been way more injuries from the high-flying matches than a stiff match. I mean, you never heard about Stan Hansen putting people out. But someone catches a dive wrong.
Knocking them out, maybe, yes, but putting them out, no.
I mean, there are guys how many people just are out of action for long periods of time because of something stupid? It's not the stiff matches, it's the high-flying matches and unnecessary things that are putting people out.
Yeah, this was the art of what worked combat is supposed to be. It's not supposed to be ballet. And you're going to feel it. You're going to need a good soak, but nobody's going to need surgery. And it wasn't insulting to anyone to watch that. It wasn't stupid or silly or funny or phony. It was exciting. It was two guys having a fucking war, hand-to-hand combat, but at the same time, there was no, for all the people who say, well, they just loved boring chin locks for 30 minutes. I never saw 30-minute chin locks to begin. I've been watching wrestling for 50 years, but they didn't have any boring chin locks in this one either. But there was nothing, no dance routines, teleportation, costume changes, et cetera, kept your attention. And it was 30 minutes.
And it went by quick.
Every time I watch Twinkle Toes McFinger Bang, I think, my God, when will this ever be over? Because it's the same shit over and over that you can't buy to begin with. This was constant motion with the same type of stuff, but in different ways that you could believe every single bit of. And it was a quarter of the time of a McFinger Bang production classic.
Well, you know, Jim, while the match may have been safe for the participants, I'm sure after the match they were sore. And you said they could soak, they could do lots of different things, but I think I have an idea of something they could use for their soreness, for their aches and pains that would be a tremendous help. And that is our fine friends over at Omax.
That's exactly right. As Dusty Rhodes once said, I can tell you about pain. Well, Walter and Ilja, they can tell us about pain, and we can tell them how to relieve that pain. And folks, that's to take the Omax Cryo Freeze. Whether it's the pain relief roll-on, which I think they should just actually soak in a tub, but also if they take the Cryo Freeze Advanced Joint Defense 1-a-day supplement, that'll relieve joint discomfort and soreness. Maybe they've been taking that all along. That's how they were able to do physically to each other what they did, because they're hopped up on the Advanced Joint Defense. Folks, a breakthrough formula that can reduce aches and pains from sore muscles, joint overuse, aging. I don't know how old Walter is, but I know I'm getting older. If you want to stay active, it's a must for muscle recovery. There you go, folks. You'll improve flexibility. This is great for Walter and Ilja. Long-term joint health, they're going to need some of that too. No THC. That may or may not be a plus for people, but Omax, folks, is offering our listeners a limited time offer, 20% off their introductory pricing on the Omax CryoFreeze supplements. The supplements including the Advanced Joint Defense. And this discount also applies toward any product site-wide through the end of November. Just go to omaxhealth.com. That's OMAX health.com. and enter the code DRIVE to take advantage of the savings. We've been raving about this stuff for ages. Everything they make is good. The sport cream, the pain relief roll-on, the Advanced Joint Defense. You can get 20% off anything on the site at omaxhealth.com when you enter the code DRIVE. Brian, I'll tell you, I don't know if maybe Walter could become the official spokesperson for Omax, because every time you get in the ring with him, you're going to need some. You're going to need it rolled from the tippy top of your head to the tippy tip of your toes.
We could see if we could set up some sort of sponsorship.
While he's just wallowing in obscurity over there on a fucking subsidiary of a developmental program when he should be the biggest star in professional wrestling. And I double dog dare somebody to find me a video of Walter working with a blow-up sex dollar, the Invisible Man. I've said I can't compliment anybody, but I feel safe with Walter. I feel safe in his big catcher's mitt paws.
See, now I worry. Now that you said that and put the challenge out there, someone's going to show up with something.
I bet you he hadn't done that. I can look at the jut of his mighty chin and see that he wouldn't do something like that. He's a man's man.
You know, for the entire time that you, and to a lesser extent me, went off on Joey Ryan and his awful act, and how pathetic he was in the ring that he had to do a stupid act, and how stupid it was that people went along with it, and how it drew less and less people.
And how he looked like a brown and serve roll half-baked covered in pubic hair.
How many of those wrestlers who went along with it, you know, Cody Rhodes did it at the Cow Palace.
Uh-huh.
How many of these wrestlers that went along with it and tried to legitimize this clown, do you think they regret it? Do you think they actually regret it today?
Well, they should, and if they haven't thought about it and realized that they should, I'm glad you brought it up, because now we can say it. For everybody in the business, everybody's disappointed me in one way or another anyway, so I don't care if they get mad at me or not. Everybody that grabbed this guy's little fucking dinghy and flung themselves across the ring just to gratify this fucking little apparently perverted goof's ego, you should be ashamed of yourself. Ashamed, I say. Because you didn't even do it to get a good guy over and help a rising young star. It was to get a fucking egocentric goof over that's now pissed everybody off that on the entire planet with what he has done or alleged to do or whatever, to the point where he's had to find God because mortals won't talk to him again. And that's the guy that you debased yourself for, to shit on the wrestling business, become a phony fuck, and go along with having a guy fling you with his schlong. All for naught. Naught, I say. I fart in his general direction.
He may like that. Let's get some questions here on the show. Another topic that has flooded the drive-thru emails over the last few days. It's come in from many people. I'm going to read one question for everyone. This was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com. I think we've had a question from him before, from Booker Teat in Boring, Oregon. I read an article that talked about an alleged list of banned images from the ThunderDome. One of the images that has been banned was Jim himself. I just wanted to get Jim's thoughts on the matter. Here are a list of the alleged banned images from ThunderDome.
Well, hold on here now. I've heard about, people have been talking about this on Twitter. I was off Twitter on Saturday because it was our anniversary, and then I was trying to catch up on things, so I'm not up on everything. But I saw people talking about it, but I never actually saw, how was this list determined? How did this leak out? What kind of list was it? Where did it come from? Is it legitimate? These things are absolutely really prohibited in the production truck, from being fed to the fucking ThunderDome. How do we know this?
Well, what I saw were images. I don't know if it was the truck or if it was just a position backstage, but they were the monitors, the screens, with all the various images that you would see of the fans on ThunderDome. And then there was a separate area with images of things that whoever's screening it needs to look out for. If you see this person or this image, you need to get that off the ThunderDome right away. We can't risk this going out.
Well, wait a minute. How many of those fucking people's ugly mugs do you think they've got in the ThunderDome to begin with? And how many people are watching? And they're going to compare those little bitty screens with these pictures they've got up. How is that going to work? What do they got? 500 people monitoring this stuff?
I saw one or two people, maybe. It may have been one person, now that I think about it.
Jesus Christ, they'd probably give them convulsions or seizures or whatever trying to follow all that shit.
Would you like to hear some of the things that were discovered that are on this list? And when I say list, once again, it was a couple pages of images that whoever there is monitoring has to look out for.
It's like when you go in a convenience store and they have a picture up on the door that says, this guy's a shoplifter. Watch out for this guy.
It's like a few years ago at the Hall of Fame. Didn't they put up signs, don't let Scott Steiner in, and they put his images all over the place?
He's going to beat the fuck out of Hulk or somebody.
I think it was Hulk, yeah. Well, here's the list. AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, Enzo Amore, Tony Khan, Cody Rhodes, Brandy Rhodes, Marty Scurll, the Young Bucks, Chris Benoit, CM Punk, Jim Cornette, Alberto El Patron, Ryback, Ashley Massaro, Superstar Billy Graham.
Wait a minute, she worked for them, didn't she? I know she's dead now, but was there heat there?
I believe the story is that she was raped on one of the Tribute for the Troop shows, and the WWE had her. According to the story, the WWE asked her not to let that out because it would hurt them. And there were other alleged incidents with Ashley Massaro and what I will put as senior executives in WWE.
Oh!
That are unconfirmed, but the stories are out there. And hopefully someday someone does look into these. And
on this list you've read so far, so basically any other company's logo, which makes sense.
Correct.
Or any other company's wrestlers, which makes sense, except they don't list all the other wrestlers. Should if they ban a picture of Cody, what if somebody puts up a picture of Pockets or one of the sock-faced Lucha Brothers or whatever? Shouldn't it be any other wrestlers besides ours and don't have a million pictures, just have people that know who the fuck people are?
Well, we have a few more things here on this list.
I hope so.
Superstar Billy Graham.
What? Goddamn, he's in the Hall of Fame, isn't he?
He is. He's a Hall of Famer. I think he sold the ring, though.
Well, yeah, but he's in the WWE Hall of Fame, but he can't be in the Thunderdome.
It is 2020. Superstar Billy Graham has been dying since 1990.
He's going to be the most elderly dying man that ever lived. He'll outlive us all.
Right? Didn't we hear about? Because on the Orezi show is when he first came out and talked about steroids and his health. It was like in 1990, 1991. It was Billy Graham doesn't have too many years left.
Yeah, well, no. Remember, before that, they showed his hip replacement surgery in the 80s on WWF television when his bones started degenerating.
That's right.
He's been in bad health for a long, long time, but he can't get in the Thunderdome. This will be the shock that kills him.
Vicky Guerrero.
Okay.
And then finally, the flags of Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Tibet.
What?
That tells me that WWE doesn't want to upset China. They're probably doing business with China.
Is China mad at their own flags?
China certainly is mad at Tibet, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, yes.
I thought Hong Kong was in China.
I don't want to go into too much Asian history here right now, but there's a lot of heat, to use a wrestling term, between communist China and Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Tibet. There's a reason the Dalai Lama went on the run.
Well, I'm sorry I'm not up on Chinese politics. I've been paying too much attention to ours that are probably even worse than theirs at this point, hopefully for only another day or so.
So, Jim, do you feel good about being included on this list? Do you feel like, why am I on this list with these other undesirables? What are your thoughts?
I was going to say, like I'm adjoining CM Punk, so at least I'm in some good company, but then there's a lot of just outright jack-offs on that list too. Enzo Amore. For every Punk, there's two Amores. So I am flattered that obviously I'm one of the most influential people on the internet that people are trying to force my image onto the program because I won't lower myself to appear on it in person. And so I obviously, because it's not like they're not putting pictures up of people, probably, unless people have tried to insert those images, wouldn't you think? And all kidding aside, those are probably the things that most people have tried to stick in there before, and or on an ongoing basis. So I'm flattered that I'm one of those people. But I hearken back to the words of Groucho Marx. I wouldn't be a member of any club that would have me for a member. So,
however, if you get Jim Cornette's face in the Thunderdome, you get a free T-shirt.
We can do that. But how would we be able to prove who did it?
Well, you could take a screenshot of yourself in the Thunderdome from your point of view, from your vantage point, and then, of course, a screenshot of the image showing up on TV.
What Brian just said. But yes, whoever gets me on SmackDown now, just because they said we can't, I didn't want to go to begin with. But now that they say you can't come, well, fuck you. So anybody that gets my face on SmackDown provably in the manner in which Brian Last just described and depicted, you get a free T-shirt of your choice.
All right. If you get Jim and CM Punk at the same time, maybe you get an autographed photo as well. But let's get another question here on the Drive Thru.
Get a picture of me and CM Punk with our arms around each other.
This question was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Jay in San Antonio. Another popular topic here, Jim. I'm sure you've heard by now about Vince and company shortening Matt Riddle's name to simply Riddle. Does Riddle pass the name test? Sounds like an idea for a gimmick Jim Herd would have had for you in 1990.
Oh, no, it doesn't pass any name test. It's not even a full name. I don't understand. I don't know what to say about why they've just had him on television for what, the past 2 years? Easily? And suddenly he doesn't have the first name that he's always had. And why wouldn't he have that name? And why would you just call someone Riddle? Unless they're going to add the R and go ahead and have him redo fucking, Frank Gorshin's part. Did he piss somebody off again? Why are they sabotaging him?
One theory I heard, and I don't know how legitimate it is that due to the fact that he is right now in the midst of a little bit of a scandal, that someone could Google his name and see Matt Riddle, and one of the things that would come up is the woman that says she was sexually assaulted by him, that maybe to prevent people from Googling his name, they just got rid of his first name. Again, it's a theory. I don't know how based in reality it is.
That might work if he hadn't been on television for the last 2 years as Matt Riddle. They already know what his fucking name is. And if they give a shit enough to find out, they already know about the whole fucking fiasco to begin with. Well, it's not like they're going to hide something at this point. And if the guy's not guilty and he has been being harassed, then you change his name. That looks shady. And if you don't believe the guy's not guilty, then fucking fire him. But it doesn't make any sense to just fucking start not even changing people's names when everybody knows what they are, but giving them either stupid or partial names. How does that help anything? If, send a guy home for a fucking year, people forget about it. If you want to do that, instead of just, we'll just fucking drop Matt. We'll just drop his first name and nobody will ever know it's the same guy on the internet. What?
Are you surprised they haven't had him start saying yet, riddle me this, riddle me that, at the beginning of all his promos?
Well, yes, except he's probably so stoned all the time. They tell him to and he doesn't remember. He's been a hard slog for me to like anyway. Because I know he's got the legitimate background and he's been in certain things that we liked parts of, but there's just the goofiness aspect to him with the whole fucking bro thing and the personality that, just the goofiness and the weird movements, I believe I've mentioned, that he makes in some cases. It's been a hard slog for me to like the guy, but he's done some good. He was in the, what'd they call it? The fight pit match, right?
That was great.
We loved that. That was great. He didn't do a lot of his goofy shaking and shimmying, but his promos are just lackadaisical is too emotional a word for his fucking promos. So I don't know. I have no idea.
Well, Jim, this has happened before. It happened to Cesaro. It happened to Rusev. It's happened to so many different guys. Now
it happened to Cher. It happened to Liberace.
Would you like to take a bet on who do you think it'll happen to next in the world of WWE?
You know what? I'll tell you what.
I'm 2 for 2 today.
I have been hearing that a lot of the cult of Cornette listeners out there have been making big bucks with our friends at MyBookie. And I understand that Charlie from Starkville has moved into a brand new double wide just because of the success. No, I'm not trying to swerve you around. This is true. Charlie moved into a brand new double wide, and he got him a 57 Chevy, all tricked out and customized, and it's got one of those dogs hanging from the rearview mirror with the head that goes boop, 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 all with the money that he has won placing bets with our friends at MyBookie. Charlie from Starkville is farting through silk, and you will be too, folks. Whether it's NFL action, college ball, whether it's UFC cards, the presidential prop bets, get in while you fit in on that one, because hopefully after tomorrow we'll know, because it'll be a blowout and the world will be safe for democracy. Folks, whatever you want to bet on, go to the folks at MyBookie. They offer action on everything from championship futures to NFL in-game live betting. Congratulations, by the way, to the people we've been hearing that cashed in on the generous early season odds on the Lakers. I understand they just won a big basketball game. You know, I don't follow these things, but folks,
they won the championship.
Well, good for them. They deserve it as hard as they've worked, and they're fine young men. All of them. I don't know any of their names.
LeBron James.
Well, he's one of them. Folks, there's all kinds of those Lakers. You know, here's another thing. How did Minneapolis get screwed? Because the Lakers were their team. There's lakes in Minneapolis. There's no lakes in Los Angeles. They've got an ocean. That goes all the way back to the 40s when this whole thing started. And Minneapolis got screwed out of the Lakers. But anyway.
Hey, that's not as ridiculous as the Utah Jazz.
That is true. That is true.
Come on.
It was originally for New Orleans, for those of you keeping track, but Darryl Griffith played for the Utah Jazz, and boy, I tell you what, Dr. Duncanstein, I'd have bet on him with MyBookie, getting back to this spot I'm reading. Folks, you can sign up at MyBookie today, and when you do, use our promo code DRIVE to claim a deposit match dollar for dollar, all the way up to $1,000. You put in 100, they give you 100. You put in 200, they give you 200, and on and on and on, you get the drift. Folks, it's promo code DRIVE for you to claim your bonus when you make your deposit for all the bets you want to make to begin your winning season exclusively at MyBookie.
Well, Jim, there are many topics that have come in this week that apparently are very popular because so many people have sent them in. Let's try to get through a bunch of these. This next one was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Peter Sutherland in Surrey, United Kingdom. Hello, Jim. Hope you are well, with a question mark.
Hello, Peter. Hope you are well, too.
But he had a question mark there. Hope you are well?
Well, in that case, I take my statement back and just ask the question. Are you well?
I wondered if you had any thoughts on the announcement during the WWE's Q3 investors call that Netflix and WWE Studios have combined to produce a fly-on-the-wall documentary series following Vince McMahon. Surely, if done properly, this could be the most important documentary series in the history of wrestling. Also, will you be tuning into the show? Kind regards. Once again, it's Peter from Surrey.
So they're not doing a documentary on Vince McMahon as far as a documentary on his life and career. They are doing a documentary series where they follow him around presently, current day.
This email is actually the first I had heard of that. I knew they were doing a documentary series.
Well, which is it? That's what I'm trying to answer. I need to know these things.
I will look into it.
As Vince McMahon used to say to me many times, you can't make a decision in a vacuum. You need to have all the information. So give me the information.
I'm looking right now for the information.
You're looking.
Hold on. Let's see what this says.
Because I'll just jump ahead and say that if it's a documentary series following him around day to day right now, I think morbid curiosity would be the only reason I'd want to I'd even rather watch if they'd have done something like that. Of course, he would have never allowed it, and I would have been hot about it at the time. But if they'd have done something like that just for me 20 or 25 years ago, that would have been some classic video. To follow him around all day, every day back then. Right now, I'm not so sure, not only with the product and the state it's in, but also from the last several times I've seen Vince on television, he doesn't appear to have as much vigor as he used to, and I don't want him to potentially come off less than the otherworldly being that we all came to know, love, and sometimes hate.
I'm not seeing anything about fly on the wall. What I have seen here, WWE President Nick Khan announced a multi-part Vince McMahon documentary has been sold to Netflix with WWE and Bill Simmons as executive producers. The series is one of Netflix's most expensive of the documentary. On the documentary side, no release date was noted.
Okay, well, that sounds like just a regular documentary.
And that means it'll be completely full of shit.
Well, and I was about to say, now I would love to see a documentary on Vince McMahon, but I'm not sure I want to see the documentary on Vince McMahon that the WWE will approve.
Or Bill Simmons. Bill Simmons was behind that Andre the Giant documentary. Bill. He was behind that Andre the Giant one, which I know a lot of people really liked it. But again, they had that, what was his name, Shoemaker? They had that kid in there they were pretending was a wrestling historian. He either didn't know what he was talking about, so he started making things up, or was just lying. I think he didn't know what he was talking about, so he's making things up. He's the one who said Andre the Giant, as a heel attraction, went to the different territories, and the top babyface would wrestle him.
Yes, I remember that. And we're all going when they credit him as being a wrestling historian or wrestling expert or whatever. We're like, who? We've never heard of this name before.
You know, all the wrestling historians were saying, what?
Well, yeah, but Simmons aside, isn't that, I know NFL Films had a degree of autonomy, to present the good and the bad, but still overall NFL Films pretty much glorified the NFL, did it not? I don't.
It did.
So I don't really see how you can look forward to an independent look at Vince McMahon from a wholly owned subsidiary of the company that he owns to look at the life. I'm going to be interested in seeing it, see what they do. You may be interested in seeing it to see what they don't do that you can take apart, because I'm factually minded also. But if they come up with some cool old shit that we might not have seen before, video, things like that, I like to watch stuff like that. And I honestly, will everyone know pretty much if the WWE is doing it, not to take it as gospel truth, because they'll say, Vince's superior business acumen, transformed a smoky bingo parlor wrestling into a major multi-billion-dollar attraction and all that stuff.
He didn't try to put anyone out of business. He just wanted to compete. He didn't ask any wrestlers to no-show and walk out. He wanted everyone to give notice and do things the right way.
He certainly did. Whenever they were leaving the WWF, he wanted them to give notice and do things the right way.
That's the thing. If you were going to do a documentary on Vince, you can't ignore all the negative stuff, and there's so much of it. For any good thing you want to say about him, he did, using predatory business practices, go after every single other wrestling promoter, every wrestling magazine, anyone who was doing business in the world of wrestling. He went after them. I just found in the Norm Kietzer files, Norm Keitzer's correspondence about all this, and how Vince Jr. told him, if you cover any other wrestling promotion except for mine, you can't have any access anymore. We're done doing business with you. And then Norm Kietzer called Vince Sr., who had been his contact for years, and Vince Sr. said, no, don't listen to him, don't listen to him. And it's exactly what happened. So, I mean, you got to talk about all that. You got to talk about him.
And by the way, let's you've run across that very quickly. For the younger folks in the audience, Norm Keitzer, Pro Wrestling Enterprises, the Wrestling News Magazine, et cetera, had been doing the arena programs for the WWF, the Philly Spectrum, the Baltimore Civic Center, Madison Square Garden, and, all points around the horn for since at least the late 70s.
No, mid-70s.
Mid-70s, okay.
Mid-70s until 83.
And actually had their own, a wholly WWF version of the Wrestling News Magazine for them to sell in the arenas there, but he didn't want Norman to cover anybody else in the world of wrestling in order to get access to do all the things that he had been doing for his father for so many years.
And by the way, I guess we'll answer this now. I couldn't believe we got questions about this. You made a reference quickly to Mankato, Minnesota.
Yes,
a couple weeks ago. And a bunch of people said, why did you bring that up? That's where Pro Wrestling Enterprises, for the most part, was headquartered. Norman was also in New York and various other places. But it happened to him. Vince McMahon tried to hire Bill Apter, tried to hire George Napolitano. When that didn't go the way he wanted, they were banned from ringside. He brought Jeff Walton in to run his magazine. That didn't last too long. He was not just going after the promoters and the promotions. He wanted to own everything. And the first battle was in 83 against the magazines.
So there you have it.
So that has to be covered. Him messing with Crockett Promotions on pay-per-view. How do you
I have a feeling unless it's a goddamn 18-part documentary of 2-hour episodes apiece, they're not gonna cover his war against the wrestling magazines.
Okay, well, what about Black Saturday? Because the previous version WWE put out there in one of their McMahon documentaries, Shane McMahon was saying how Vince did this and the ratings went up and they were doing great and Ted Turner wanted to be a part of it. So we had to get away from there, which is a complete bastardization of the reality, which was the ratings went into the toilet. People wanted Gordon Solie back.
They had more calls and complaints to TBS about taking away their quote-unquote Gordon Solie wrestling than they did about any other programming decision ever made before or since in the history of Turner Network Television.
To the point where Ted Turner brought Bill Watts onto the station, gave him Sunday nights, quickly became the highest-rated show in cable television, put Ole Anderson on Saturday mornings, and, Vince McMahon was about to get kicked off that network until Jim Barnett brokered the deal where Jim Crockett Jr. paid $1 million for the TBS time slot, which ended the talks with Ted Turner and Bill Watts, brought Ole Anderson back into the fold. That funded WrestleMania because Vince was out of money. There was no more money. Between that and the New Japan deal, that funded WrestleMania. So, I mean, that in a sense has to be talked about because it's all about Vince gambling on himself and all the usual crap.
They're not going to talk about that.
There's various books right now in production about Vince McMahon and the WWE. And the WWE has a list of people that the people writing the books are not allowed to talk to. And at the top of the list is Dr. D. David Schultz.
I wonder why.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. How do you ignore the Rita Chatterton thing? How do you ignore the 92 scandals? How do you ignore so many different things, which they're about to do? I mean, we'll find out very briefly. They're about to do
I'm just saying, the reason why I say they're not going to cover those things is because they're not going to delve that. And maybe I'm going to be wrong. We shall see. But they're not going to delve that deeply into any wrestling history. They are going to quickly gloss over whatever happened before 1983 and primarily concentrate on what Vince's father had done with the WWF, barely acknowledge that other promotions ever gave them a run for their money or exceeded their business in some places, and then start with what Vince did with his father's small company that was making a fortune and how he built it up into a global sports entertainment juggernaut.
His father's company...
I'm guaranteeing you there will be very little...
Oh, yeah, no, you're right.
History.
I guarantee you're right. I guarantee we're going to have to do a whole show debunking everything that's on there. And it's going to be the whole, he put all of his money down and he bought his dad's company, not his father gave him a sweetheart deal and he paid for the company out of the company's profits because he took over the company in 82, and then he had 1 year to pay off in installments the partners of Capital Wrestling, and he did so out of the profits of this company that was making tens of millions of dollars a year at least.
Well, it was grossing over that. It wasn't making that. Some people say, well, making means profit. It wasn't making a profit of tens of millions, but it was grossing that. It was grossing more than, because it was the Northeast Population Center. So it was always the biggest grossing territory. But yes, you are correct in that he paid for it out of it was already an ongoing business. All he had to do was not cancel anything that was happening, and it was going to pay for itself. And that's not even diminishing what Vince has done since then, because yes, he made a lot of money and he did a lot of things right. Most of it did not involve the wrestling product, but it involved picking the right people to work for him and in the office, as far as the merchandising and the licensing and all the et cetera. He went overboard in recent years with hiring people with not only no knowledge of, no background in wrestling, and probably had never seen it before, to the point where there's sometimes a disconnect between what they actually do and most of the people working in the company. But while, it's classic example of he even said, he sells sizzle, not steak. His wrestling has never been the greatest in the world, but he's made more money at it because he picked the right people in business decisions of who to do these things. And every other promoter, whether it was Jim Crockett keeping his same front office staff in the the office on Briar Bend Drive and them just being outmanned and it went too fast for them, or whether it was the ludicrous management of Eric Bischoff in the 90s, where he lucked into it and then lost it because he was paying everybody like a drunken sailor and making all those screwy deals, and half the company or half the Turner umbrella didn't want the wrestling company there to begin with, so everybody wasn't pulling the same rope. Or whether it's in modern times, vanity projects by billionaires' kids and hire everybody that he likes personally instead of people that have experience in the things they're supposed to be doing. That's why Vince has, yes, I'm not saying that he didn't ever have Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock, but many times over the last 30 years and more now, Vince has won these battles because he was just in business better, not because he had better wrestling. But they will, and part of that is history is written by the victors, and they will continue to misrepresent. This is another example of like a Hulk Hogan book, isn't it? Where the truth is impressive enough. Do you have to lie about shit when you were already the biggest box office attraction at one point in the business? Do you have to tell people that you worked 450 days or 500 days a year because when you were in Japan and the United States at the same time, you'd fly across this was actually in Hulk Hogan's book. He would fly across the international date line from here to Japan so that he would actually work twice in two different countries in the same day. And he worked 500 times a year or whatever. Point is, ignoring the fact that if he flew back the opposite direction, he'd lose the day he just gained. So it doesn't make any sense on the face of it. But the truth should be impressive enough. He won, but they can't even tell it correctly and with accuracy on all sides.
Yeah, they won't. It'll be a big lie.
Oh, no.
Lie. Ted Turner was obsessed with me. He just wanted to put me out of business. Never heard Ted Turner say Vince McMahon's name ever.
He did a couple times on the phone. Hey, Vince, I'm in the wrestling business. I think that's what it's like. It's like Trump being, jealous of Obama and wanting to erase everything he did, because I think it pissed Vince off that bad. I'm in the wrestling business too now.
Well, our next question, another popular topic the last few days, even though you kind of addressed it on The Experience, because a lot of people have sent it in, and this show is coming out on Election Day. I'll ask this. This was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Stu Hardy, 1979.
I thought you were going to say Stu Hart.
From Stu Hardy, 1979. I would like to hear Jim's thoughts on the revelation that The Undertaker donated to Donald Trump's campaign.
Like I said, I'm scared to compliment anybody anymore. Everybody in one way or another tends to let me down in some way. Here's the thing with Undertaker. I know obviously Undertaker would be a big gun guy, and he's from Texas, and I would imagine Undertaker would be a Republican. But Undertaker always, to me, he's a good guy. He's an honest guy. He didn't ever seem to be a guy who would either be a stupid, gullible sucker or a criminal. That would never occur to me to describe Undertaker as either one of those things. And therefore, since he's not a stupid, gullible sucker, he has to know what Donald Trump is. He's in the wrestling business. He's probably met him. But I still say that you cannot be a living, breathing, cognizant human being with the ability to take in and process basic information and not see pretty much instantaneously what and who Donald Trump is when you hear him speak, whether it's in person, on television, or whatever. So since Taker or anybody else who supports him at this point will just open that up, it's especially for somebody I've looked up to, been a fan of, thought a lot of, you suddenly find out there's something wrong with him and you can't look at them at the same way again, and you don't know why. They seem so normal in every other facet. Some assholes, you go, well, yeah, I figured him all along. But other people, since Undertaker is not a gullible sucker and has to be able to recognize what Donald Trump is, then that leaves criminal lying asshole. So does Taker or anybody else support him because he's a criminal? Or do they support him because he's just an obnoxious asshole? Or do they support him because he's a pathological liar? It would seem to me that a stand-up guy like Taker would say, no, I don't care what the ideology is. Be the Republicans against Trump, or be the Lincoln Project. Stand up for the country, stand up for patriotism, like some of these other actual human Republicans are, and say, we don't have the ideology of the Democrats, but obviously it's all hands on deck for the good of all of our country, that this repugnant piece of human scum needs to be gone as quickly as possible from our lives so we can get back to normal. He's not the man for the job. Almost everybody with cognizant thought and critical thinking have agreed on that on every spectrum of politics. We're left with the cultists, the fucking uneducated. Taker's not that either. I can understand Jericho more. He's a rich white millionaire, and also he's very religious. So maybe I can understand where the character flaw comes in with him, but Taker seems like a guy who would say, no, I don't care whether they agree with my politics or not. This guy is a criminal. This guy is a liar. It's not like that can even be debated anymore. It's been reported 25,000 times by the Washington Post. It's factual that he's an obnoxious asshole and intellectually ignorant about most everything that a president needs to know. That's been testified to by the people that have been trying to tell the president what he needs to know for the past 4 years. He won't listen. So Taker, a guy in the wrestling business who should know a work and a con when he sees one. Taker, a stand-up honest guy supporting a criminal and a liar. Anybody, Taker or anybody else, that you would think would say no for the good of our country and the world, because that's what at stake. It's not just, this guy doesn't just endanger us and our country and our lives. It's the whole planet. Whether it be because he's got his finger on the button or because he doesn't believe in climate change because it'll piss off the oil industry. Has Taker showed that he's just another rich white millionaire and it's all about he thinks this idiot will make him more money because he gives breaks to all the rich people that he pals around with? Has it come down now to, yes, I will ransom my principles and my country and the American way of life and rights for women and rights for minorities and rights for gay people and rights for the environment and everything else the rights of the Supreme Court and judges across the country to represent the people instead of the few old white asshole Republicans that are still trying to cling on to this country that they should have lost a long time ago? Is it that? Are you just a rich old white man now, Taker? It seems like stand-up, honest people would say no, regardless of what you think. Regardless of what the ideology is of the politics, this is all hands on deck because this is the United States of America. And with this guy fucking all these things up for 4 more years, running off all our allies around the world, being a Russian bitch. He's got Putin's dick in his mouth. And Putin's got his dick up Donald Trump's ass. Because whoever Donald Trump owes that $400 million or more to, I guarantee you Vladimir Putin knows it. If it ain't him, he knows who he owes it to. Or the taxes. Did Taker or anybody else, you support a tax cheat? 50% of Trump supporters believe in QAnon. Did you see this?
I saw something like that, yeah.
Which means, if not the whole thing, that there's something to it that needs to be investigated, which means 20% of the United States of America, because that's 50% of Trump supporters equals out to 20% of the United States of America, believes in QAnon. The devil-worshiping, baby-eating, child pedophile ring being run around the country by Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. They think Joe Biden is the pedophile because he's a nice old man rather than the fucking creep that plays sticky finger with porn stars and fucking pays them off and fucking basically has been accused of sexual assault or rape by 24 people. But Joe Biden, Uncle Joe that wants to hug the little girl's a pedophile, you raving lunatics. They also believe that the Democrats are going to turn us socialist like Venezuela. We can't even get health care. You think we're going to be socialist in your lifetime? You fucking morons. This is what these people believe. And when you go on record as given this piece of pig shit that has stained the White House turd color just like him and his goddamn whole flock of asshole baby families, when you give him money, you take up for this shit and you put your name on it, you're going to have to take what comes, which is all of the responsible, sane people in this country saying, I can't believe this of you. I will never look at you, whoever you is, whoever was part of this whole thing happening to us for the last 4 years. And we should remember, put a big red T on their foreheads like a scarlet letter. You people brought this on us. And we can never look at you the same again because you have something wrong with you. And we need to get this shit out of here. We need to vote Trump and the Trumpino crime family out. We need to vote all the Republicans out. And we need to make sure that the people that are responsible for getting us here by being suckers enough or criminal enough to vote for this fucking piece of shit. We need to... Hey, hold on one second. I'm voting for everybody that's not fucking Trump. There you go.
Who's that?
Somebody calling me from a number I don't know. They're all trying to get me to vote for somebody. Anyway, regardless of what the fuck happens, we need to make sure that hopefully he won't steal it. Hopefully he's hired all the referees, put the court in place. They're building a wall around the White House. They're going to have the military is going to have to drag this giant man baby out kicking and screaming. But we need to make sure that these people realize that we know that they got us in this shit, that they put the world in danger, and that we're not going to let them get away with it again. If you get this show out on Tuesday before the polls close, folks, if you haven't done it already, run out there. Because as we've illustrated, there are a lot of surprisingly ignorant people in this world, and you'd be surprised who some of them are. And I still say the polls might be off because some people are ashamed to admit they're going to vote for this guy, as they should be. So we need to get the Democrats that usually sit on their ass because they think they can't do anything about it, that section of the population, as well as the motivated Democrats that have already voted in record numbers. But we need to get the unmotivated ass sitters out quick because this is a big fucking deal. We cannot allow this son of a bitch to fuck our country up any longer. And who knows how long it's going to take to fix what he's done already with the deregulation of everything and the giveaway of everybody's store to the fucking billionaires and the corporations and the Supreme Court, which will probably be fucking us all for years and years to come. So that's what I have to think about Undertaker or anybody else at this time with all that's going on. Giving money to this, that's like giving a pedophile a fucking bag of candy and saying, here, go spread this around and have some fun. It's as irresponsible as this repugnant piece of shit is as a president of the United States. It's even more irresponsible as a citizen that anybody is continuing to enable this and act like that everything that I've just said is not the truth and is not taking place. They're like the emperor has no clothes mentality where they cannot fucking just come to admit that this guy is a massive failure and a criminal and everything that everybody has said about him and more. You're just so fucking far up your own ass. You can't just come out and say we were suckers and we got conned and this can't go any farther. You fucking idiots. Thanks for asking me that fucking question.
Yeah, I don't know how much of that's going to make YouTube.
That probably ain't going on YouTube.
It went in a direction I didn't anticipate, I must admit.
Well, because it's the day before election, motherfuckers. It's time that the fucking smart people took the country back from the goddamn idiot segment. Because this has been going on long enough.
Well, while you're fired up, I'll bring this up real quick. This may be the spot for it. So this morning when I go on Twitter to see what I missed overnight, the first thing that popped up in my feed, because you just brought up blocking him, Harry Smith at a Halloween party that Chris Jericho threw. And I'm thinking, here's the next super spreader event. Right?
Wait a minute, he threw a Halloween party in the middle of a fucking pandemic.
If he didn't throw it, he was the main attraction there, but I got the impression from
who would
tweets.
go to a Halloween party in a pandemic?
Chris Jericho.
Well, just like his orange idol, I guess. Did you see that they have linked somewhere around 30,000 cases and probably 700 deaths to super spreader Trump events? Not people that were all there, but people that as a result of the people that were there, they extrapolate these things mathematically. So now Chris is going to compete in that respect as well. I guess Harry Smith's got nothing better to do because he's not working anywhere right now because of the pandemic. So he might as well go get some COVID from the COVID god.
When they do a documentary,
just a little bit of the COVID.
One day when they do a documentary about the coronavirus, COVID-19 taking over the country, do you think they're going to use Judas in the background?
I'm becoming, infected with the COVID-19. Of course they are. And as another, the big companies Ring of Honor is the only ones doing actual, legitimate, sensible, logical COVID testing, because Sinclair Broadcasting made them, and also they taped in Maryland, and there's a commission there in that state. And I mean, you can read it online, the protocols they take. It's amazing. I would crack up sitting in a hotel room for a week by myself, but nevertheless, it's a fucking joke everywhere else. Even though they're probably spending more money than Ring of Honor did to do their haphazard testing. They're running sloppy shops. I remember that quote somewhere. Think about this. How many outbreaks have they had at the Performance Center or the whatever the fuck? Because all of these fucking goofy fucking wrestlers are all young and think they're invulnerable. That's why they do all the dives, and that's why they go out and continue to slobber all over each other in fucking Florida. I'm not going to tell you shouldn't have one person you can slobber all over. Get that person, and for the time we're in the pandemic, have a monogamous slobber. But don't go out to bars and just find random slobber partners while there's a pandemic going on. And if I can suggest that people not try to get laid often, for heaven's sake, then anybody can take that advice. And AEW, they're doing the testing, going through all this, and when they test the people when they get there and all that stuff, and then they let all of their outlaw talent go work outlaw shows where they have super spreader events with outlaw fans and outlaw wrestlers giving each other outlaw COVID. And then the promoter of said outlaw event has to tell all the people who attended, please go get tested. You saw this on the internet, right?
Yeah.
The promoter of Mudstock suggested everybody that attended go get tested for a communicable disease that they probably picked up while they were there. So whether they're mingling socially at Halloween parties or slobber fests in Florida because everybody's horny and got too much time on their hands, or whether they're going out and doing what they call wrestling in front of these fucking goofy crowds of people who will go out and watch this goofy wrestling in the middle of a pandemic and working all these outlaw shows and then coming back to the big leagues where they get tested. What the fuck good does that testing do? And then they go right back out and do the same thing over again. So the whole goddamn thing is ridiculous. And if I was anybody owning any of these companies, I would tell these guys, if you expect to continue to get paid by me, your primary employer, stay the fuck home unless you need to go to the grocery or go to the fucking show where we have a controlled environment. You're making more money than you could do at anything else at your age right now. So spend some time brushing up on your fucking watching some wrestling videos and learn a little bit about your goddamn history of your business and stay home and keep your nose clean. And for anybody who's allowed to, don't go and work these goddamn mud show festivals where they'll let anybody and their brother in the ring, much less in the building, while there's a pandemic going on. Or I just won't pay you and you can fucking go and do whatever the fuck else you want to do. That's if I was an owner of a major company right now, that's what I would say. Fuck, it's not that fucking difficult to figure out. But then once again, you have not only, you've got authority figures in wrestling. Chris Jericho, if he's not the booker of AEW, he's certainly one of the top stars and recognizable names. So his opinion to these little minions and newbies and greenhorns means something. So he's setting a rotten example by going to the fucking bike rally. Just like the bad leadership in our country. Don't wear a mask. That's that's a pussy behavior. And either, we're rounding the corner or God will save us or whatever the fuck those stupid stories they tell. It's the same thing with all these young wrestlers. If they were being led by veterans who didn't buy into a con man and a real estate fraud's sucker line of bullshit, and instead we're telling these guys, hey, stay home, put your masks on, don't work these fucking goof shows. It's not worth it. You might make a payoff now, but for fuck's sake, who knows who you're going to get sick, and let's get through this thing, especially if they have contracts that are paying them from a reputable company. but there's no leadership involved anywhere. Why are you making me cranky? I started out happy with old Walter.
All right, let's get another question. You're on the drive-thru. You're trying to find one that'll make you happy. That may be hard.
While you're doing that, while you're looking for a happy question, I will mention that one thing that I'm happy about is that the fine folks at JimCornette.com, Cornette's Collectibles, the customers there are getting their items shipped swiftly to them.
Swift
or shipped. Either one. We can swip some or ship some. Or whatever the case may be. Whether it's face masks, T-shirts, burger towels, books, graphic novels, autographed pictures, Cult of Cornette membership certificates, classic wrestling DVDs, and more. If you go to JimCornette.com, folks, by the time you hear this, all orders ordered through October 28th, I believe, will be winging their way to you. But we're caught up. We've got now around about a 4 or 5 day turnaround. So get those orders in. The holiday season is coming. Get gifts for the whole family because this stuff is cheap. Not in quality, but definitely in price. And if somebody you know hates me, get some of my shit and send it to them. That'll teach them. And even though thank you, fuck you, buy T-shirts and face masks are going to be too late for the election, they will work for Thanksgiving, Christmas, holiday, office parties, family parties, and the election or the inauguration in January. That's when I think, as a matter of fact, I'll give $1,000 cash to anybody who can get a real, not photoshopped, but a real picture of somebody wearing a thank you, fuck you, bye T-shirt in the crowd at the inauguration. How about them apples? You like apples, Brian?
I like $1,000.
Well, how about them $1,000? Anybody gets that T-shirt in a picture in the inauguration?
Let me stop you before you go too far. What if a whole bunch of people show up and do this?
Well, you would think that if you can get a fucking close enough to be in the picture of the inauguration that you would have to go through some kind of vetting. So I'm thinking that maybe one person might even be goddamn stretching it.
See, I think you better clarify right now because showing up to the inauguration could be standing anywhere on, when you see those wide shots.
No, it needs to be a goddamn picture of the inauguration going on and the fucking shirt in the background now.
So you mean it has to be someone literally on the, I think they put that little platform there for the inauguration. Someone has to go to Congress? You want them to actually be seen with Congress in the background? You better clarify what you're saying.
Get close enough so Trump can see it when Biden's getting sworn in. And we're going to do this like horseshoes. If there's more than one, the closest person to President Pig Shit wins. How about that?
It's more reasonable.
All right.
Let's get another question. Hopefully one that makes you a little happy.
JimCornette.com.
JimCornette.com. This next question was sent in to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from John Camacho in Northeast Ohio. Jim, first I wanted to thank you for all you have done for the sport of professional wrestling. I have had the pleasure of watching you and the Midnight Express face off against numerous tag teams at the Cleveland Convention Center and will always cherish those memories. My question is about the decision to replace the Mid-South TV title with a medallion. Whose idea was it? How was it regarded by the wrestlers? Were they a little off-put by the fact that it wasn't a traditional belt initially? I watched Terry Taylor beat Ted DiBiase for the North American title, Wild TV champion, and to me, it looked a bit odd to see him holding a small medallion in one hand and the massive North American title in the other.
Well, actually, it was sort of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. One was too small and one was just plain too big. Neither was just right. Well, first off, none of the wrestlers gave two flying shits whether it was a belt or a medal because they didn't care. And actually, the medal would have been something lighter that they could put in their bag and not have to schlep around. So the wrestlers weren't upset. I was not there when they did that, but apparently, and Brian, you know your Mid-South history, when they instituted the television title, did they have a belt to begin with and then go to the medallion, or did they do the medallion first? Because I remember the medallion.
I don't remember there being a belt at all early on, no.
Then in that case, it was a deal where fucking, not only did Watts not want to buy a belt, I'm sure, but also they decided to make, since it was the TV title, make it different. And since they had so many amateur athletes in that territory, whether it was a Dr. Death or whether it was Rick Steiner or whether anybody, they win medals and medallions in the whether it be in the Olympics or in the NCAA or whatever. So that was the thinking behind it, and that's basically, there wasn't any other big conspiracy or any kind of deep thought into it otherwise than that. And as I said, the wrestlers didn't give a shit because it wasn't, especially in Mid-South and especially back in those days, it wasn't like today where all the guys were so thrilled when they suddenly won a championship. It was part of a bigger picture. You could, was your money going to go up? Whatever. You were thrilled when you won the Mid-South title or the North American title or the Mid-South tag title because you knew you were going to be in main events and therefore your pay was going to go up. The TV title was just a way to get you on TV, which was a positive because you got a chance to have some more time on TV, but you were also probably going to fucking drop it several weeks after you won it because the TV title changed hands more often. So it wasn't a big deal in anybody's eyes. Did I say that, Brian, basically as clearly as possible?
I think so. When was the first time you heard about a wrestler being given a replica of the title they won? Because nowadays wrestlers are given a belt.
That. What now?
Well, wrestlers, if a wrestler wins the World Heavyweight Championship, they get a World Championship to take home.
Seriously?
I believe so. Like UFC, when the UFC would have a championship, they would make like 6 belts. That way they had one for them, one for the fighter, one for the former champion. Like they had multiple belts so they could just give them out.
But they can't be doing that with because every match on these big shows is for some title, because WWF has 3 world champions and a U.S. champion, a North American champion, 7 sets of tag team champions, and they rotate constantly. They can't be giving away that many belts.
Well, they can't be giving away that many belts, but when you see these wrestlers and you see like sometimes photos of them at home in their little makeshift home office or man cave, and you see the belts in a
I'm assuming they bought those themselves. I've never heard of the company actually giving a guy, here, you had the belts, and now here's your own to take home. Especially, here's the thing. I've got a couple of replicas that I bought of the NWA World Tag Team Championship belts that we had in '86, the ones that I liked. I bought replicas of those myself because I like those belts and they look good sitting here. So, but the company, Jim Crockett, didn't say, oh, here's take copies of the belts. They were lucky to even have that set. That's also the belts in the territories, even though sometimes guys were lackadaisical, for the most part, they got more respect than the belts do today because it was the only one. When you won the belt, it was the same belt that all those great wrestlers in that territory or that company had before you, and you better goddamn take care of it. And you better have it ready to drop back when the time is right, or you probably never work that territory again, and they'll probably hold up your check for however long or whatever. But there was only one belt, and there were no replicas. So fans had to make their own. Now, the fans have better-looking belts than the goddamn wrestlers do, especially the ones that were in the old days when the guy had it in his bag every night and hitting opponents over the head with it. The fans' belts now look better than the belts did back then. But they don't mean as much. No, I'm all for if guys during their career win a particular belt that they really think looked cool and they want to buy their own, but I think that would be the most markish thing in the world for the company to give replicas of the belts to the fucking guys. I don't Oh, my God.
What do you think of fans bringing replica belts to shows?
Well, I mean, I don't have any problem with them doing it. That's why I just said the fans have better look. I'm amazed constantly, continuously. Every time I see it, the fans have better looking belts than the promotions did in the old. And sometimes the promotions still do, because that fan takes care of it. They're not getting hit over the head with the thing every day.
No, they're just walking around an arena with it over their shoulder like they won something.
Oh, you mean like a just a wrestling show rather than a fan fest?
Yeah, well, even a fan fest. Well, why are people walking around with belts?
Usually to get them signed. I can understand that.
That's different. That's different. Yes.
Yeah. No. If you just dress up like you won the Mankato heavyweight championship and just wander around like a goof and you're not getting anything signed and you think you really are a champion, then you're kind of a mark, no matter where the situation. But if you have belts and a belt collection and you bring one to get signed or whatever, I am fully in favor of that.
When I was a kid and I used to go to the Nassau Coliseum for shows, there was another kid who always had this belt, and it was a complete bullshit belt. Like, it didn't look like the Winged Eagle belt or any of the famous belts you knew. It was just a wrestling belt that he got somewhere, and he would always have it, and he just loved the attention he got for having this belt at the shows. And then I remember one time we were hanging out across the street at the hotel afterwards, and he walks in with the fucking belt. Like, he went everywhere with it.
Hey, I think belts have been somewhat devalued because of the ease and accessibility of same, to where they don't have the same mystique they used to. I remember the first time when I started, taking pictures, doing photography at the Gardens, when I actually got the chance to get up close to the belt and take a picture of it. Wow. Now there's brand new, beautiful championship belts available everywhere. Everybody can have one, whether it's been used in wrestling or not. It's a material. And they're not particularly as special anymore. And I wish that the promotions, instead of making also all those, the WWF or WWE belts just have a big W on them, right? Just almost all of them.
So ugly.
Everything looks the same. Couldn't they make some type of modern belt that you can't do a replica of exactly? They could sell kind of like lower quality versions, but their own. I mean, it's like if for our fans and friends across the pond, if you could buy the crown jewels at the local Boots drugstore and they were the exact same quality as the crown jewels, would the crown jewels mean that much anymore? I don't know. Something to ponder. When I do my best pondering, Brian?
When is that?
When I'm shaving my balls. Because I'll tell you, you need to make you need to pay a lot of attention when you're shaving your balls, because you don't want to have any mishaps, but you can also ponder well at the same time. And actually, you can ponder and shave best at the same time when you use the products from our friends at Manscaped. Because once again, even if you did happen to think, well, maybe I should have that championship belt, and you weren't paying attention and you ran the trimmer right into the base of your dick with a regular old barber trimmer, you might give yourself a do-it-yourself vasectomy. But with the Lawnmower 3.0 trimmer, you won't even nick yourself. You won't feel it. That's because you can't nick yourself with the Lawnmower 3.0. I've tried. It just doesn't happen. Or the Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer can help you whack those nasty weeds in whatever delicate hole that you might be wanting to put it into. No nicks, no snags, no tugs. The Crop Preserver deodorant for your balls, because after all, they have to smell good. Or even if you've got smelly feet, the Foot Duster foot deodorant. You don't know what the Crop Mop ball wipes, just in case. Always on the go, even in a pandemic, if you want to have a slobber session. But wipe your balls with the Crop Mops. Refined cologne by Manscaped. You can spritz it in the trouble areas or just around the nape of the neck or behind the ear. People will be following you down the road saying, boy, he smells like a New Orleans whorehouse. That is good. Anyway, whatever you want to do to your body in the way of freshening up, whacking the weeds, or making it smell better, folks, you can do it with our fine friends at manscaped.com and the products that they provide. And whether I'm talking about the Lawnmower 3.0 or the Weed Whacker or the Performance Package, the Crop Preserver, the Foot Duster, the Refined Cologne, no matter what, you can get 20% off and free shipping if you go to manscaped.com and use the code DRIVE, D-R-I-V-E. Winter is coming. We're going to have warmer clothes. Warmer clothes leads to more body sweat. More body sweat leads to mildew. Mildew leads to crotch rot. Do not let your dick get crotch rot. Go to manscaped.com. 20% off, free shipping, and no crotch rot with the code DRIVE, D-R-I-V-E. Be sure to join the Manscaped movement and spend more time inside this winter with your balls.
Well, Jim, let's get some more questions in. This next one was sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from, looks like Jim in Corbin, Kentucky.
Oh, come on now. If that is indeed his real name and place, that's awfully suspicious.
I recently re-listened to episode 132 of the Drive-Thru, specifically the segment on Vince's banned words. At one point you mentioned Terry Funk would be showing up as Chainsaw Charlie, and what a conundrum this has caused me. Vince obviously didn't want Terry Funk there. Why did he hire him? Was it as a favor to Mick Foley, perhaps? Who brings in an older wrestler who was just on WCW a few years ago and throws them under a hood for a new gimmick? And brings them out of a box with a chainsaw? What an entrance for some weird masked lumberjack. Do you know anything about his hiring or why they chose to give him the gimmick? Thanks. And that's it.
I don't know whether Vince particularly wanted Terry back. Everybody else wanted Terry, right? I definitely wanted Terry. Jim Ross wanted Terry. Even Bruce Pritchard wanted Terry. I don't know. I have heard that Terry suggested the Chainsaw Charlie thing.
I had heard the same.
And I suspect that it may have been because of the previous time that Terry had agreed to work there, and they expected him to be he was going to originally be one of Lawler's knights at Survivor Series. What was it, 93, 94? Which
93,
year was that?
Yeah, with Jeff Gaylord,
Okay.
Greg Valentine, yeah.
Yeah, and he got there and found out he was going to be on the losing team and they were all going to get unmasked, and he left the note on the outside of Vince's hotel room door and said, Vince, sorry, had to go home and take care of my sick horse. Thanks, Terry. And he left. So Chainsaw Charlie was Terry Funk's nickname for John Ayers, his friend that used to play in the NFL, and passed away of cancer. And I think, because I was hot when I heard he was going to be Chainsaw Charlie, and I'm like, how the fuck did this happen? What's going on? I blamed Shitstain for a while because he was around then. But I think it was probably Terry said, well, at least it won't be the name Terry Funk doing whatever the fuck that I might be doing. But I had the argument with Kevin Dunn at the production meeting because Chainsaw Charlie's debut was in Madison Square Garden. And I can't remember how it came up, but Kevin Dunn swore that nobody was going to know that it was Terry Funk. And I mean, you're out of your fucking mind. Well, Jim, no. Terry Funk hasn't worked here in years. Yes, but this is Madison Square Garden in New York City, and these are probably the smartest fans we're going to find. And not only has Terry Funk been on WCW last year, but on television for the last 20 years in every major wrestling organization and territory. And just because you put pantyhose over his head, they're going to know it's Terry Funk. You're out of your mind. Well, Jim, that's completely different audiences. So, of course, when he comes out of the fucking thing and he's got the chainsaw up in it over the air and he's doing that circular loping walk. I don't know how else to describe it. You know what I'm talking about, Brian. That he did. The people in the garden start chanting, Terry, Terry, Terry. So there you have it. But if it was what Terry wanted to do, then that was fine with me because at least we had Terry Funk around. But even with that, there was issues with Kevin Dunn thinking, oh, this would be a brand new persona. Nobody will know who it is. You fucking Bugs Bunny Tooth moron.
And that's all you have to say about the creation of Chainsaw Charlie.
That's pretty much what it was. That's what happened. And then primarily Terry wanted to team up with Cactus. Cactus obviously wanted to team up with Terry. But the Chainsaw Charlie thing was it was thrown in there to make things weird in whatever respect. But don't blame Vince for that whole thing.
Our next question, Jim, sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Brian in Massachusetts. I recently heard an interview with Colt Cabana and Scorpio Sky, where it was mentioned that one of Cody Rhodes' mottos is basically, quote, spend all the money now, you'll make more.
What?
What is the worst advice you've heard someone in management or an executive vice president tell a wrestler?
Oh my! Give me that line again.
Spend all the money now, you'll make more.
This can't have been said. They were joking. They had to be joking. That's probably maybe because is Cody possibly careful with $1 and like Owen Hart or Mick Foley used to be, and that's what they're joking about it, because nobody would actually say that in the wrestling business, would they?
He obviously idolizes Ric Flair based on his gimmick. Was Ric Flair careful with $1?
Well, no, but no.
Was Dusty Rhodes careful with $1?
Well, no. Remember one time Dusty was in I think it was still Florida Championship Wrestling before they made it NXT, and he was working with some of the guys, and he just made the comment, baby, Vince better be glad I never saved my money. I wouldn't be here. I don't know what to say to that. What is the worst advice? I'll tell you, not in a mainstream, not in a major league way, but that idiot Sal Correnti that was running the Wrestle Reunions for a while, that it would have been a wonderful thing if he'd actually tried. He wasn't using his own money. He was using somebody else's. But I told him one time, I said, it'd probably be a real good idea if you tried to make some of this money back so the guy will give you some more to continue this. Right? Because he would bring in like 100 or more guys and fly them in and pay them or whatever. And of course, it didn't last but a couple of them. Right? But I said, shouldn't you try to make some of this money back so that they'll give you more to continue doing this? He said, Jim, we're going to fail our way to success. We're going to fail our way to success. I know we're doing some things that we might not should do, but we're going to find that out. We're going to figure out what works, and we're not going to do what doesn't work anymore. We're going to fail our way to success. He failed his way to failure. So that's probably some of the screwiest advice I've ever heard. But that has to be a joke. For anybody in the wrestling business to say, spend all the money now, we'll make more. That actually would have got a huge pop in the fucking locker room at one point in time. From guys who would know that that's crazy in the wrestling business. That's what a lot of people do, but it doesn't make it any less crazy. Was he talking about the company? Or just the individual guys?
I didn't hear the actual comment. Based on the wording of the email, I think he was speaking about a specific motto for his own life and a credo for other wrestlers to follow.
I don't know. The company seems to be following it because they've signed up every unwanted redheaded stepchild outlaw wrestler in the world. Like they're just going to make infinite amounts of money from now till the end of time. But I don't know if I'd give that advice.
Well, Jim, our next question sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Furman Torres.
Furman is a very loyal Cult of Cornette member and tweets often about our fine programming.
In fact, he tweeted here, as you guys know, AEW Full Gear is this Saturday.
Oh, God, I forgot about that. Thanks, Furman. Now I'm really in a bad mood.
Rumors have been flying.
We're going to have to do something about that, aren't we?
We have to watch it and review it next week here on the Drive Thru.
On the Drive Thru next week. God damn, that's right. I remember that now, too. I got the memo from
Kippelman.
From Naka to fuck it off. Or
Jace Nakarado.
Kippelman sent the memo. Kippelman sent the memo because Chase Nakazawa.
Jace Nakarado. But
that's what I said. He was off sick that day.
Can I get to this question?
Go ahead.
Rumors have been flying that Sting could appear at the pay-per-view. I don't think it's true, but what could AEW get out of Sting besides the fact that he's one of the biggest stars?
What could AEW get? I don't know. What have they gotten out of Jake the Snake Roberts, Tully Blanchard, Arn Anderson? I could go on and on. They are mute people who walk to the ring on a semi-regular basis and have very little to do with the actual ongoing portions of the program. So I think Sting would be more than happy to take a large amount of money to walk out there and do absolutely nothing and say very little. I mean, that's all they do with the legends anyway. It's just, hey, look who's on my show, Ma. I don't think Sting is going to be on their pay-per-view. I think if he was interested in doing anything with the wrestling business, he'd want to do it with the WWE because it would be a Legends contract or potentially appearances or maybe another DVD or whatever. He's already said he's not going to wrestle anymore.
Well, I think that's where the rumor comes from, is the fact that his WWE contract just expired. So they pulled down all their merchandise of Sting, for instance.
Well, he's probably wanting to, if he wants to have any connection with wrestling, he's probably wanting to have another contract with the WWE. I don't, what would AEW, they just did a toy line of all their little toy wrestlers. It would take quite a while to get something of Sting in production from scratch. WWE already has that and the outlets to market it in a wide variety of places that dwarfs AEW's. If Sting is not going to, I don't think, be a manager, he wouldn't even be a heel wrestler. When we tried to, when he was being booked as a heel wrestler, he refused to be a heel wrestler. I don't think he's going to be a manager, so it would be left for appearances, a Legends deal or something like that, which the WWE is set up for a guy like that, and to compensate him accordingly. AEW would be just paying him to make a shot on a TV show. I don't think he needs to do that. So I don't know. I think people are just extrapolating that he might not have a deal with WWE to think that he would suddenly show up on AEW. What would he do there? Why would they bother to compensate him the money that it would take to entice him to do something with them and fuck up the WWE if he wants to have anything more to do with the WWE? Or maybe he just wants to sit at home since he's got more money at this point than the federal government and he can't wrestle anymore. Maybe he just wants people to leave him the fuck alone. You ever wonder that? For heaven's sake.
Okay, well, let's get another question here. This question was sent to Corny.
I'm just making myself a note. I got to fucking record that crummy pay-per-view.
Well, on the topic of that pay-per-view, I'm going to
record that crummy pay-per-view Saturday night.
Well, on that topic, this was sent to not CornyDrive. This was sent on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from John Wilson. If FTR versus the Young Bucks isn't a no DQ match, with the Bucks never challenging again if they lose, why don't they wait for the bell to ring and Tully hits one of FTR with the title belt? Winners by DQ, FTR. He's got a good point.
See, a good mind can find a loophole in any situation. The whole thing is goofy. This has been the worst build to a supposedly long-awaited tag team match in ages, if not ever, that I've ever seen. Would you say, Brian, that people are probably less interested in seeing this match now than they were when the FTR showed up the first day at AEW's door? Because of the way that they've bungled it and not given us anybody to cheer for or root against because we don't know whose side we're supposed to be on. And nothing has really happened to in any way seriously heat the issue up, except they think that somehow fighting over who the fans say is the best tag team in wrestling instead of the championship is the focal point of the whole thing. Do you give a shit about this match now, honestly? Especially now that they've gimmicked it up with this last-minute stipulation where you know they're going to pull something that's going to be kind of shady?
I think they've completely screwed this up. A year ago, 2 years ago, this was the one match everyone wanted to see. They brought FTR in and had them save the Young Bucks, which has never truly been explained. This whole build-up, and then the Young Bucks suddenly become heels, and Tony Schiavone, I can't think of another time in 35 years he took a bump.
Never.
And then a week later he forgave him.
Wasted it on a pre-tape.
just the whole build-up and the Young Bucks really bad acting.
You know what? Tony was always jealous about David Crockett taking that Russian sickle from Nikita Koloff. That's what he waited all this time to get revenge. Now David Crockett got Russian sickled by Nikita Koloff, but Tony Schiavone one-upped him. He got super kicked by the Young Bucks in a pre-tape.
The best was, who was it that they super kicked where it was Matt Jackson and the leg of the alleged other Buck, but we never saw him.
A disembodied foot. It was Bart Brady. That was Officer Bart Brady.
That's right. That's right. No, this has been one of the worst booked dream matches maybe ever. The match may end up being good. I think they're wasted. Just the build-up and doing the match now with no fans there or very limited fans there, they have handled this so poorly. The tag team division has been a disaster. The integration of FTR into the tag team division couldn't have been handled worse. It couldn't have been handled worse. And this dream match doesn't seem as important to me now as it did 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago.
Now it's like, get it over with already. We know you're going to screw it up, so just get it over with.
We know you've been waiting a year to get the tag belts on the Young Bucks and the heavyweight title on Omega. Just do it already.
But that's ass backwards even anyway. The Young Bucks should have won the belts at the start. And they claim, and once again, maybe they're smart and they know that they were being selfish and doing all this for themselves while trying to tell everyone that they were being charitable and putting everybody else over and elevating everybody else. They hadn't got one person over. They did a couple of jobs. They hadn't got one person over. But they should have been the champions all along. And then FTR could have come in and beaten them for it, and it would have meant something. Instead, they dick around with this stupid saga with Paige and Olivier, and then finally put the belts on a real tag team, and now, apparently, either the Young Bucks are going to beat FTR for the belts, or they're going to do the thing that Cody did, which was lose a match where they can't challenge for something, so they never have to do another job, and then create their own fucking title. But it's as you said, the whole thing has been ass backwards. We don't know who the heel is. We don't know who the babyface is. We're less interested than we were when it was just a concept. Now that we're actually going to see the match, nobody really gives a shit except for the people who eat that pablum on a weekly basis. And FTR they've become two of the boys. Instead of being the outsiders and the people who were going to call shots when they came in and that you could believe in and that was going to stir that fucking fan base up that were sucking at the teetle of the Bucks and Olivier and all the rest of the play wrestlers. Here these guys are going to come in and they're going to tell everybody what pieces of shit they are, and they're going to lay waste to everybody, and they're going to have a ton of heat. They're more polite than the baby faces. It's insane.
I think even the most hardcore AEW fans have admitted that everything in the past several weeks, at a minimum, with the Young Bucks has been bizarre and bad acting, and the build-up to this has been atrocious. Again, it's a dream match that doesn't feel like that anymore. They blew it.
You know,
I think the AEW fans realize it too.
Well, there'll still be a bunch that won't admit it. They just won't. But you can't. There's plenty of blame to go around. But okay, you can say, well, Tony Khan's an inexperienced booker. And yes, he has to take the blame for a lot of this stuff. And you can see that he's made a lot of these matchups, and then the guys have to go in and try to figure out a way to make it palatable. But you know, especially with these guys, his executive vice presidents, that he is getting heavy input, if not finished product for this crap, from the talent themselves. I say talent in quotation marks. Which means that they don't have the first clue what they're doing either, because they've never worked in a major company at a high level where the business was allegedly depending on them and where they had to get over in front of more discriminating and a larger number of people than the goofballs who go and watch goofy gymnastic kids playing indie wrestling, and they can't handle it. And I don't know whether they realize they can't handle it or not, because they are so, they love the smell of their own farts. It's not smog in Southern California. It's smug. But they might even have to, well, thank you. You don't watch South Park, or you wouldn't be so tickled. You'd think I was stealing it. It's not original. But anyway, they don't know. And I just don't know whether they don't know that they don't know. But I don't know whether they don't know whether they know what they're doing. Does that make sense? They don't know what they're doing. But the question is whether they know that they don't know what they're doing.
Oh, no, I think they've convinced themselves they know exactly what they're doing.
So we should issue a smug alert.
To Rancho Cucamonga? Is that where they're from?
Yeah, it's easy to get there. Just take a left turn at Albuquerque. Oh, God, even their hometown comes out of a Warner Brothers cartoon. Anaheim, Azusa, and Cucamonga.
Well, Jim, another question here on the drive-thru, and several people have followed up with us about this. You and I had a discussion, I forget what the genesis of it was, about the fact that shoot interviews have now gone beyond wrestling, and that there are mafia members, former members of La Cosa Nostra, who are now breaking omerta on camera. I sent you various links to check out. Were you able to watch any of these?
Yes, I watched a couple, and I'm going to get to some more of them because they're like potato chips. But it is, honestly, besides the fact there's a little bit better production value, it does look like wrestling shoot interviews. Michael Francese, how do you say that? It's Italian. You ought to be.
I ought to be. I'm Jewish. Michael Franzese.
Well, yeah, but you're from New Jersey, so.
Well, I'm from Long Island.
Yeah, well.
Which is actually where he's from, I think.
Well, there you go. You're up there amongst them. Anyway, what you said, Michael Franzese, yeah. I have heard about, one of the clips was him telling about the gas tax scam that they did. He was making $10 million a week generating that. What they did was they bought, with their other illicit gains, they bought a bunch of service stations, right? A bunch of gas stations. And they started buying a ton of gas and selling a ton of gas. But they would set up these companies and they wouldn't pay the tax. Tax at the time was like 30 cents or 40 cents a gallon of gas, and they were selling tens of millions of gallons over all these stations, and they wouldn't pay the government the tax. When the government caught on to them, they hadn't got tax paid, they would close the company down, take the money out, and open another company with other service stations. They got away with this for quite some time, apparently. And I'd heard about this on another documentary, and this was him doing a sit-down shoot interview explaining it to the guy, and also rebuking or rebutting another mobster that had called him a squealer and a rat and a snitch and all his what was that guy's name? Oki Shakina?
Ori Spotto
or Oki Shakina, one or the other. Who looks like your average he looked like Fat Tony Salerno on that famous Time magazine cover. Just jowl-faced, fucking mush-mouthed old gangster guy. And he said, yeah, he's a rat. He's got 50 million in the savings account in Panama. I know who put it there. His initials are such and such. And Franchese is the son of the more famous mobster member of the family or whatever. But he almost reminded me of like a mob version of Anthony Scaramucci. He's really smooth and he's well-spoken and he'll hit you and he's got the beautiful teeth and everything. But he was like, oh, this guy's he's a fucking nobody. Nobody ever heard of him. They use my father's name and my name all the time. Is this a whole subset world of now mob shoot interviews where now they just don't give a shit about exposing their own business and they just call each other rats?
Yeah, you got to watch the other ones I sent you too, because it gets even better. I did like with the Michael Franzese one where he's countering the remarks of Ori Spata, where he says, I had a friend who worked as a film agent, and he said, this guy's in my office threatening all sorts of things. And I said to him, look, the next time he's there, pick up a chair and hit him over the head with it.
And then kick him out, because he's nobody.
Because he's a nobody.
He's a cockroach. He's a cockroach. He's nobody. He's scum on your shoe.
Do you think they have a Jim Cornette that's like, the business was so much better before everyone was breaking omerta?
Back then when we swore the code, it meant something. We did the blood sacrifice and the oath. We took the blood oath with the axe like Joe LeDuc, and it meant something. I wish that Dennis Coralluzzo had lived to the days of shoot interviews, because that would have been classic.
He did one.
I've seen it many, many years ago. He did one, but I mean, as they became more populous and plentiful, and the production was upgraded and everything, he would have been hilarious. And he would have been hilarious on the mob shoot interviews, because I guarantee you, Dennis didn't have anything necessarily to do with the mob, but he could have done a promo and made people believe it. As a matter of fact, that's what he did with the halfway with the introduction interviews he did for Chris Candido and Smoky Mountain Wrestling. It was like some fucking shady guy in New Jersey wearing sunglasses and an overcoat, getting handed packages on the steps of the courthouse when he was talking about Candido. I think he could have done either one of them, the wrestling interviews or the mob interviews. But yeah, these things are great.
In Memphis, he was an angry attorney who didn't like Jerry Lawler. They made him an attorney. I love that.
They didn't need to go all the way to New Jersey to find an angry attorney that didn't like Jerry Lawler.
So do you think you're going to watch any more of these videos?
Yes, I am. I'm intrigued now. I want to see what else they've got to say about, because that's like, who was it? Sammy the Bull Gravano? He turns government witness, government agent, spills the beans on everybody, has plastic surgery on his face to look different, goes into the federal witness protection program, and then starts doing interviews. Is he the one I'm thinking about?
Yes, and actually one of the videos I sent you is a recent sit-down interview with Sammy.
Oh, good Lord. And I've got to get into that, because what sense did that make? Was it like the wrestling business where 20 years ago everybody just said, okay, everybody knows, we give it all up, we just say whatever we want, we'll admit to any crime? He gets plastic surgery to hide from the people that he ratted on, and then goes on television every chance he gets. And nobody does anything about it?
I guess not. He got busted. He got arrested too for what was it? Selling meth or something?
Well, I guess the mob is like the wrestling business. They don't even have any enforcers anymore that go out and take care of rats and people who spill the beans. It's very disheartening. Not only know that you can't count on wrestlers to protect their business anymore, now you can't even count on the mob. Boy, I tell you, who can you count on? I'll tell you what. I'll tell you one person you can count on. I'll tell you one person that won't sacrifice their principles. I'll tell you one person that when you go to them and you say, I've got a problem, I need help, I need somebody on my side, I need somebody to fight a big corporation, I need somebody to take care of me in my time of trial and need, I know who you can call.
Call Stephen P. News. If you need to sue. An outlaw mud show or two. Those are the rest.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, if you have gone to all the trouble of having plastic surgery to change the appearance of your face in order to avoid retribution from people that you have ratted on, don't call Stephen P. New, because he works for the other side of the fence. If you're a baby face, if you're on the side of good and right and truth, if you're a humble and lovable servant of the public, if you're a good person who uses their left and right turn indicator and you have been harmed or damaged or infringed upon or had your rights violated or taken away, then you can call Stephen P. New at newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084. Folks, right now, there's some deadlines to get in on some of these big cases. The New Law Office is doing opioid litigation. All the big major drug companies that have overprescribed medicines and not warned people about the side effects, and people were addicted to opioids. Stephen P. New is taken up for you, and these cases are going to be filed by March 2021. If you're a military service member and the 3M defective military earplugs caused you hearing damage or other kinds of problems, those cases are going to be filed in the summer. If you took Zantac, and I'm one of these folks, and thank goodness nothing's happened yet, but if you got cancer due to overuse of Zantac or any use of Zantac because it had cancer-causing ingredients, those cases are going to be filed by summer 2021. Personal injury, wrongful death, all other types of cases, he reviews them. If he can help you, he will. And if not, you're probably helpless. Folks, newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084, and our good friend Stephen, the consigliere of the cult of Cornette, see, there's a mob reference there, may be announcing some wrestling-related litigation, not even involving dear old Jim here, in the coming months ahead. newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084.
That's right. It took a while to get there, but let's get
I want to, in case they were writing it down.
Let's get
remember when the wrestling announcers, what are you laughing at people writing stuff down? Remember when the wrestling announcers used to say, folks, during this match, get your pen and paper ready because we're going to be giving you the address you can write to for a picture of your favorite wrestler to send a get well card to the guy that's hurt or whatever. And then they'd announce, and folks, our main event today is going to be for the sick and shut-in folks who can't go to the matches live. We're going to have a title match on TV today. They'd say all those things. Now they just scream at you and you tune them out.
All right, this next question, sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com, does not have a name attached to it. Hello, good sir. So it was brought to my attention that many, many years ago, Ric Flair and Ricky Morton were once on a boat, and both Rick and Ricky got so intoxicated that Ric Flair fell out of the boat. After realizing Nature Boy was not on board, Ricky turned the boat around to help Rick, but almost killed the Nature Boy by doing so. Nature Boy was so upset about a missing sock, and not so much that Ricky left him in the water. Any truth behind this?
Okay. Was I in the boat?
Not according to this email.
Then why the fuck am I supposed to know?
Well, these stories go around the locker room. You would think if this happened, or if someone laid under a glass table. I mean, you hear these stories.
The boat story that you just recounted is nothing that would be out of character or out of the way for either Ric Flair or Ricky Morton. I possibly suspect where they would have gotten a chance to go out in a boat together, because it wouldn't have been in the Carolinas. They'd have been awfully recognizable. Maybe it was that NWA trip we took down to St. Martin that time that Crockett paid for. But nevertheless, I have no fucking idea because I wasn't in the boat and they didn't relate to me. every single story of both of their lives and anytime they ever intersected. So therefore, I cannot deny or validate the charges that but it sounds good. I've known Flair's been in a bunch of boats. Ricky's been in a few boats. They've both been drunk a time or two. And I can see Ricky almost killing Rick to try to save him, because I don't know that Ricky's a great boat captain, but I have no knowledge of this specific incident.
Okay, our next question.
All right, then.
Sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com.
And between the two of them, I'd have rather probably been in the room with the glass table rather than the lake with the fucking drunken boat captains.
Once again, no name attached to this one, but they want your thoughts on recent comments by Miro. Says Miro's Genius Thoughts. I'm going to read you this.
Okay.
I don't care what you think about my gimmick. I don't care about any of these things because, quite honestly, I don't care. I am the best man. You got to understand that I've been pushed down for way too long that, all of a sudden, for me to start listening to fans, or to not even fans, because those are not fans. Those are just critics. Because fans just enjoy what you give to them. Critics are completely different. I think what we have done, and it's not just the fault of wrestling, but just as a society, we want the quick turnaround right away, right then and there. We don't like waiting for episodes to come week to week.
Wait a minute, what does this have to do with his shitty gimmick?
We don't want to wait the 30 minutes. We don't want to even wait for the ads. We don't want to wait for 30-second ads, because we just want the final product right then and there.
I don't want to wait for ads. I don't want to wait 30 minutes. I don't want to wait 30 seconds. I want him to leave my television screen now. I will agree with that. But once again, what does that have to do with his crummy, shitty gimmick?
But if I had come to AEW and become champion on day one, there are going to be 90 other million people who are going to be like, oh, well, look at this. He's just another former WWE guy coming in and taking the title. And look, we have Hangman Page.
Hold on. If he ever becomes AEW champion, there's going to be a lot of people going, what the fuck is this?
We have Hangman Page and the Bucks, and everybody else is just waiting for their opportunity. End quote. What are your thoughts about the ponderings, or as it was put here, the genius thoughts of Miro?
The meanderings of English is his second language, so we will assume that in his native tongue, in his head, what he said made any sense at all, and we'll give him the benefit of that doubt. I don't know what instant gratification has to do with the fact that he has a shitty gimmick. Is he saying that we're supposed to wait and see how this plays out, and they will explain why that he's been presented as a goof that dresses badly and plays video games on the television program, and suddenly sometime down the road he's going to become a serious wrestler and the Bulgarian Brute again, and we're going to forget about all this stuff? Or is he conflating the people who do have a short attention span, which that is true these days, with the people who laughed him out of the building for wearing a pink Minnie Mouse t-shirt on his debut with his cute little bleached blonde hairdo and his goddamn loafers he was wearing, to where he looked like he just attended a Liberace event as Liberace's stand-in rather than the Bulgarian Brute. I don't know what he's saying. Here's the thing. He's been held down, according to him, by obviously the WWE. It doesn't look like he was held down. Now it looks like he was held up, because they got a lot more out of him than chuckleheads over on the other channel are, haven't they? Did the WWE have this idiot playing an unplugged-in video game with his little sidekick Pip that they both got mad at because it was broken by the tag team of the Chucklefucks?
No. I mean, at the end, they blew it with him, and they really made him a pretty shitty character. But early on, they got it right with him. It's just that, like everything with WWE...
Until apparently his obnoxious personality, his stupid ideas, and his general all-around idiocy caused them to say, you know what? We don't feel like pushing this guy anymore. And then they made him look like a goof. Could that be it?
There are certainly cases, and I think FTR fall into this, where the guys are smart, they know what they want, and they get frustrated in these meetings with Vince. And then after they leave, they do an interview and they talk a little bit about that. But I think people need to remember, not everyone who the WWE drops the ball with is FTR. And what I mean is, there are plenty of people who go to Vince and sit down with him and say, I'm not happy, here's my ideas, and they're terrible.
Yes.
Vince isn't the only one with terrible ideas.
No.
And sometimes two terrible ideas meet, and they cancel each other out. That's why Jericho was somewhat bearable for the last few years in his WWE run. But anyway, back to you.
Back to you, Lance. Well, that's basically it. You can tell that this guy doesn't have the first fucking clue about. He's another one of these guys that's got in the wrestling business that didn't get in the wrestling business first. He went straight to developmental. Did he not? Did I miss his long career on the independents?
I don't know about a career in the independents, but I believe he actually comes out of, was it Rikishi school? He had been trained by the Samoans.
Okay, but he didn't work events in front of people for any serious time, if any time at all, before he went into WWE's program. Point is, it's hard enough to learn anything about the wrestling business these days working independents because of the quality of most of the independents. But at least you've been in the wrestling business. And at least maybe you've been around a few veterans that will tell you the truth instead of whatever the current NXT training line is. But this is another big muscle-headed goof that doesn't know what he's gotten into. Probably was never a wrestling fan, or elsewise he'd know better about what it's supposed to look like and supposed to be presented like. And he doesn't know how to get himself over, and he got over because of his genetic gifts in the promotion that pushed him originally when he was new and unseen, and that's the way they kind of liked him. And then they started changing shit around about him, and he didn't really know how to take care of himself. And then he was less over, and now he's gone to another company that where not only does now he not know how to take care of himself and get himself over, but nobody there knows either. So he's been put in middle card comedy shit, but he still thinks that he's a big wrestling star because he's been on a big TV and because people have told him he is. And he has no frame of reference about what the wrestling business is to know that he ain't as good as he thinks he is. So that's another one of these cases. And if he'd been through an old-fashioned training program or a territory, he would have been taught from the start. He didn't know anything about wrestling, and he needs to shut up and do what he's told, and hopefully people who knew what the fuck they were doing would tell him, and then he might learn some from it. But I don't see a lot of places that he could have been to learn, and I don't see a lot of aptitude for him to learn, because you wouldn't have to do a lot of learning to know not to fucking show up smiling and playing video games wearing pink Minnie Mouse t-shirts and expect anybody to take you as a fucking top guy. So there you go. Stick a fucking sock in that fucking Miro. Miro! I want to see Miro versus Riho.
Well, Miro is a big, strong guy. Obviously, he's in great shape. But maybe part of the problem is he's not getting enough nutrients in his diet. Vitamins, minerals.
I don't think he's getting enough oxygen to his brain is what I think his problem is. But folks, if everybody else would like to be in even better shape than Miro, because I bet his cardio is shit. He's carrying all that bulk around. Folks, if you want to stay in great shape and it be less filling, athletic greens. The winter months are coming. The days are getting shorter, less time outside. We've got to supplement our vitamin D, especially to benefit our immune systems. At the same time, we don't want to make messes. We don't want to go out to the disease-ridden grocery store and get a whole bunch of produce and vitamins and meat and vegetables and minerals, the whole Vitameata-Vegemin thing. We don't want to buy those things. We don't want to come home. We don't want to stick them. We don't want to stick them in the blender and fling shit all over our kitchen walls. We don't want to throw the stuff in the sink and have to worry about cleaning it up later. None of that with Athletic Greens, because, folks, they'll send you the mix and you mix it up with water. As many as 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients, you'd be hard-pressed to find a more nutrient-dense formula on the market anywhere. It has a multivitamin, multimineral, greens complex, probiotic, prebiotic for gut health, an immunity formula, digestive enzymes, and all kinds of stuff. There's no need for multiple pills, complex routines, messy type of juicing. Just get your immune system support, your gut health support, your daily nutrition, all in one clean and green mix, and it tastes good too. Brian, you know as well as I do that you can't just take it. You'd rattle around like a beanbag if you took all the vitamins in pill form that are contained in one delicious serving of Athletic Greens.
I love Athletic Greens. I have it every day. In fact, I'll give some advice out there. I know a lot of people, they want to change up their lifestyle. They want to improve things. They want to invest in their lifestyle. Start your day with Athletic Greens like I do, like so many others do. You're guaranteed that you got the minerals and nutrients, and I add my vitamin D drops into it. To start the day, it helps you maintain the rest of the day when you know you started it so well.
That's right. Start good, finish good. And folks, right now, Athletic Greens is giving our audience, the cult members, a special offer on top of the all-in-one formula we talked about, a free liquid vitamin D supplement with your first purchase for additional immune support. So, upgrade your multivitamin intake. Nutritional formula that's going to help cover your daily nutritional bases. You want Athletic Greens. Athletic Greens makes getting as much high-quality nutrition as possible incredibly easy without the need to buy multiple products. And go right now to athleticgreens.com/JCE and get a year's supply of vitamin D, liquid vitamin D, for free with your first purchase. athleticgreens.com/JCE. Get your virility, get your immunity, get your ability, get everything up. Put a rock in your sock. Folks, Athletic Greens.
All right, well, let's get one or two more questions here on the show.
Do you have a rock in your sock?
I don't wear socks typically. I'm a flip-flop kind of guy.
Well, you flip-flop from one...
I'm barefoot right now.
Barefoot and pregnant?
Barefoot, not pregnant.
Well, have you taken a test lately?
Let's get this next... I don't know how to answer this ridiculousness. Let's get this next question here on the show. This was sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Guy in Nebraska.
Hi, Guy.
Rewatching some of my favorite movies, the Rocky series. It is always so surreal to me when I see Hulk Hogan as Thunderlips in Rocky 3. It is even more weird to me since I know Hogan was in the AWA during that time. I have seen some interviews with him and Stallone about how Hogan injured a bunch of stuntmen. My questions are, would WrestleMania be the same type of spectacle without this movie? Vince made it very mainstream with celebrities, and of course Mr. T was in the main event with Hogan, with both of them being in Rocky 3 together. My last question is, would Jim pick any other wrestler during that time to star in the movie instead of Hogan?
Well, that's all over the page. So what the gist of the question was, first of all, were we freaked out to see Hulk Hogan in Rocky, but did that make WrestleMania... Help me here. What is the point of his question?
The last question was, would there be someone who would have been better in the movie than Hogan? The previous question was, would WrestleMania have been the same type of spectacle without the movie Rocky 3? And I guess in a lot of ways, the question really is, would Hogan have become the spectacle without Rocky 3?
Well, I mean, obviously it helped him being in that movie. I think he was perfect for it because they wanted somebody that was much bigger than Sylvester Stallone. That's the way the part was written. And I think Stallone in real life is like, what, 5'8", 5'9"? So, it was a massive size difference. Hogan did a good job. Stallone has always been supportive of wrestlers in the wrestling business. In Paradise Alley, Terry Funk has told a lot of people, some of the stuntmen were making snide comments about wrestlers and wrestling. And he went and told, hey, these guys do their shit in one take in front of a crowd on all four sides. So y'all shut the fuck up because you can't do what they do. Basically, paraphrasing what he said, he took up for the wrestlers and the business. And it not only Paradise Alley, but he's used, in his various movies, he's used a number of the guys. So I think it certainly helped, but Hogan was already drawing huge crowds in the AWA, as Guy said. And he was already hot, and Vince put a tremendous push behind him to the wrestling fans. I think it was some nice icing, and it was serendipity that he was in that movie because it raised people's awareness of him. But he also was on the Tonight Show before he worked for Vince, wasn't he? Off of the Rocky III thing.
Yeah, he was on the Tonight Show off the Rocky III thing after he worked for Vince, but before he worked for Vince Jr.
Well, yeah, that's before the run that everybody is talking about. He had a high profile, but it was because of his wrestling, not because of the WWF. And the movie came because they, Stallone wanted a wrestler and he fit the part. So yeah, it helped, but that whole push for WrestleMania, maybe the biggest thing might have been that, he knew how to get a hold of Mr. T. They were both in the movie together. Maybe he knew the management or whatever. Maybe is that, what got the germ of the idea, and I think I used the right phrase, the germ of the idea there for Mr. T to be in WrestleMania. Maybe that, that might have been the biggest thing. I don't know that it really boosted WrestleMania over and above what it would have been to begin with, just because he was in that movie. It was all happening at the same time. What do you think, Brian?
I think there was a perfect storm around Hogan.
Yeah.
Went to the AWA as a heel, got himself over as a babyface. Rocky III comes out. It's a pretty gigantic movie. Launched Mr. T. I mean, Mr. T was a complete unknown entity before that film.
Yeah.
Made him a major star. Hogan gets a lot of publicity off that, not to the level of Mr. T. At the same time...
Yeah, and by the way, that's a good point. Hogan was already a big star in wrestling and drawing crowds of 20,000 people in Minneapolis. Nobody knew who the fuck Mr. T was. Mr. T came out of the movie as a bigger star than Hogan did. In Hollywood.
Yeah. He got the A-Team off that movie.
Yeah.
At the same time, Hogan's exploding in Japan. He's a major star in Japan. He's got merchandise all over the place. His match with Inoki for the IWGP was 83. And he lights up the AWA. I mean, everyone still talks about that they should have put the belt on him. That match they built up with him and Bockwinkel. And then...
Yeah, but actually, in hindsight, it's probably good they didn't, because he wouldn't have come back and dropped it and he still would have left. I bet you.
Right, unless they got it off him, within that year that he was still there. Greg Gagne claims, and I always find this interesting, that the plan was, he claims it now, I don't know if he claimed it then. The plan was that Hogan was going to defeat Bockwinkel in early 84, and that was going to lead to Hogan versus Andre in the AWA, because they had been in the Battle Royal together. Did he tell you that when you recorded your interview with him a while back?
I don't think so. But because I would have said the same thing I'm about to say to you, but you wouldn't have been able to get Andre in 84.
Yeah. Well, they didn't know that yet.
Yes, they did.
Andre still did dates until early 84.
No. Yeah, it was fall of 83, Andre, because I saw the last time he was through Tennessee was summertime at latest of 83. And it wasn't long after that. He wasn't allowed to do any shots in territories. He could still go overseas.
No, he did. He worked Texas early 84. And then also he worked Florida.
What part of
Dallas.
Texas?
He worked Dallas.
Well, Vince wanted those Von Erich boys.
He did, but then he worked Florida after that.
There was Eddie Graham was still alive, wasn't he?
And there was the last person who wasn't a WWE exclusive wrestler other than Japan who worked Madison Square Garden was J.J. Dillon, because he always wanted to work there, and Eddie Graham called in a favor And this was what? This was April, May of 84, after the war had already started. And that's why he got booked there. So, I mean, there was a relationship, obviously, with Eddie and Vince Sr.
I'll go further. If Eddie Graham had still been alive after January of 1985, at some point, he and Vince McMahon would have been doing business. Vince would have wanted to do business with Eddie Graham because of who he was to his father, because of who he was to Dr. Jerry Graham, whatever. And there was always a back channel between the Florida office and the Vince Sr. office, even to the level that people didn't realize, even if you go back and look at the old clipping sheets, I've always just found this interesting. They would use the same ad layouts for some of the Florida towns as for some of the WWF towns up in the Northeast. Florida wrestling was on TV in New York. New York wrestling was sometimes on TV in Florida. All the people involved in the WWF office had homes in Florida. They socialized together with Eddie Graham in the old days. Vince Jr. at some point, and Eddie Graham, had he lived, especially because he was in financial trouble, which through other things besides wrestling, which led to his suicide, they would have done business. Vince had a lot of respect, I'm pretty sure, for him just for what he had done with his father. Remember all the times in Madison Square Garden in the 70s, Eddie Graham, Mike Graham, Florida talent would appear on the Garden shows, even if they weren't in the territory. They would make specific shots from Florida. I'm just saying that I believe that had Eddie Graham lived, he would have been one of the guys that would have been doing business with Vince, and Vince would have wanted to do business with him, and they would have had something worked out.
Well, Florida TV aired in the New York area on Spanish International with Vince Sr.'s blessing. Florida and LA, and of course there was a big connection between the LaBelles and Vince McMahon as well.
And plus everybody, Eddie Graham was the best finish man in wrestling. And if nothing else, can you imagine what you could have done creatively for a wrestling promotion if you'd had Pat Patterson and Eddie Graham working together? Holy
If
fuck.
Eddie Graham controlled his alcohol intake, he would have been the perfect guy to have there. But the question would have been, at that point in his life, could he curb the drinking?
Well, for that much money, wasn't he drinking because things were going south? I mean, he always drank, but it got bad there at the end because his territory was not doing great, but he'd had the problems with the real estate, the land deal, whatever the heck that he'd lost a lot of money on and was having issues. I mean, for Eddie Graham, from the time that he was a main event star and selling out Madison Square Garden as one of the Graham brothers, was noted as one of the great bookers that taught almost everybody, one of the great finish men, was a icon in the state of Florida, but was powerful in the NWA. Vince took Barnett, Jim Barnett, Eddie Graham, Sam Muchnick, and who else would have been the most powerful guys in the NWA for a 15-year period around about that time?
And Barnett owned a piece of Florida, so there was a relationship there, too.
Yeah, so they would have been working together. And as I said, creatively, with Eddie Graham and Pat Patterson together, they may have been able to talk Vince into taking the business a little bit more seriously because the shit that they would have done together was so good, or would have been so good.
It is interesting. I mean, Vince made an offer to buy just about everyone. He tried to do a deal with Fritz. It didn't work. But he bought Stu. He got in with Toronto. He originally bought LA and then decided he wasn't going to pay for any of it. Georgia, we know what happened. AWA, he tried to buy out Vern before things went the way they did. We don't know any stories about him trying to buy Crockett. But you would think with Eddie Graham in Florida that Vince would have tried to do something with him in 84. It's weird that there's never been any stories that I know of that have gotten out that Vince, wanted to do a deal with Eddie Graham and wanted to buy Florida.
What if he wouldn't have wanted to own it? He would, because I think he may have, I'm not trying to read his mind, but he may have either thought that Eddie Graham wasn't going to sell or he wanted to keep. He didn't mind if Eddie Graham was in business in one state in the Union, which is all that he had or wanted, but he was so influential with the talent in the rest of the business. Everybody had either been employed by, mentored by, trained by, worked with Eddie Graham, every big star. So would he have eventually, instead of trying to buy the thing and let Eddie retire, would he have been saying to himself, hey, I'll just leave Eddie alone. I may run Florida because I want to, but I'll leave him alone, let him do his thing. And then later on, maybe that's somebody I can use as a resource. And he's got his own territory down there so he can feed me people. It could have, would have been an early version of develop. Can you imagine if Eddie Graham was in charge of developing talent? Holy fuck.
If he wasn't drinking, I think it would be all right.
Well, yeah. And also, and Vince didn't try to buy or run out of business Jerry Jarrett and the Memphis territory, because that's the reason why that he brought Jerry Jarrett to Stamford when they all thought that Vince was going to go to jail over the steroid trial. The only person who won't admit this now, everybody has known this at the time. They knew it at the time. They said it at the time. They've known it since then. Bruce Pritchard won't admit it because he didn't like Jerry Jarrett because Jerry talked to him like a stooge. Dogs bark and cats meow. However, he didn't fuck with Jerry Jarrett's territory. He couldn't get into Memphis and draw because he didn't have Lawler. Nobody else could. Crockett couldn't draw in Memphis against Lawler. But he didn't try to put the company out of business, and he ended up bringing in Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler. Jarrett to run the company if he had gone to prison, and Lawler because Jarrett was going to bring Lawler as both a wrestler and announcer. And then they had a talent trade agreement. Vince didn't want to run everybody out of business. He just wanted to run the people out of business that either he thought would be competition to him or places that he thought integral to getting his national network. Say he had to have L.A. He really wanted Dallas, a major market. He didn't have to have Memphis. And Jerry Jarrett had said to me one time that the reason why that he got the call from Vince was because originally when Vince Sr. sold to Vince Jr., sold the company, he had called Jerry Jarrett, Vince Sr. did, and said, my son is going to piss a lot of people off, and he's probably going to need some help or a favor someday, and I hope that you will be there for him if he does. Because Jerry Jarrett, as the booker of Memphis and the Memphis end of Gulas Welch's territory, and then starting in 77 as the promoter of his own territory, he'd done tons of business with Vince Sr. He'd booked Andre through him. He had met him at numerous times at the NWA meetings and worked with him. Jarrett had booked Atlanta. And Barnett knew fucking Jarrett. Barnett's the one that hired Jarrett to book Atlanta. So therefore, when Barnett was up, everybody knew everybody. But the thing is, Vince Jr. knew that the last thing Jerry Jarrett wanted to do is take over the WWF. That's why he was going to put him in that position, because he knew he wouldn't try to fucking pull a Jim and Tammy Baker and whatever the fuck Pat Robertson thing, take it out from under him. And Jerry Jarrett was more than happy when Vince didn't go to jail to then turn around and go back home to Tennessee, because he told me he was up to drinking 2 bottles of wine a night sitting in that apartment in Stamford that they would get for the people that would come in, and couldn't wait to get out of there, out of Connecticut. All Southern people feel the same way. And I think Vince knew that fucking Jerry Jarrett was never going to live and work and run in a company that was based in Connecticut. So he didn't want to run everybody out of business. He just wanted to run the people out of business. He either needed their talent or their geographical area, or he thought that they might be competition to what he was trying to do. But he would leave certain places alone, I think even then on some level, because he knew he'd need some help, some sources of talent, some other promoter to help at some point. Does that make sense?
To an extent. I think Vince, when he's desperate, does things that could be perceived as nice to other people. Because when Vince was super aggressive in the 80s...
I'm not saying he was being a beneficial to these people or being a benefactor. I'm saying they weren't a problem to him, and he was probably going to be able to get something positive for himself out of it. So that's not exactly, but again, just having no evil motives.
To tie back to earlier in the show, Vince wanted to put all the magazines out of business. He didn't want them to exist just without his photos or photos of his guys. He wanted them all gone so he could eat up 100% of the market share.
Right.
He wanted the same thing from the promotions. He truly didn't want anyone existing unless it was him. He was running 3 to 4 shows a night with crews all over the country.
But then why'd he work with Jarrett then? Why'd he work with me?
In
He wanted
92,
Smoky Mountain
in
Wrestling
92
to
and
exist.
93, when was he more desperate than then?
Well, that's what I'm saying. But he could have waged a concerted war to run Jerry Jarrett out of business anytime in the previous 8 years. But he didn't do it.
He did run against him. He did bring his own king into Memphis, causing a lawsuit.
Well, no. Here's what he did. He didn't bring when they made Harley Race King Harley Race. He didn't book him in the Tennessee towns to get a lawsuit. He booked him in the Tennessee towns because they were running the Tennessee towns, and that was the gimmick that Harley had on TV.
But didn't the ads simply say the King, not Harley Race? The ads in the newspaper said, whatever, Junkyard Dog versus the King.
I do not have it in front of me, so I'm not going to commit either way. But I don't think they thought that Lawler was going to sue him, which he did, and that was. I'm just saying that there was some people that he probably thought that he could either work with or that could be subsidiaries that he didn't necessarily have to fucking scorch all the earth. But the magazines, again, if it was a magazine that was being sold in 3 states in the South, it would have been a problem. But all the magazines that were on the newsstands, they were national. He couldn't control the narrative to the larger population.
Hey, one other question for you, and I don't know if I've ever heard a firm answer on this. A lot of people have opined, but in 87, World Class is a disaster. Kerry Von Erich's out still with the motorcycle injury. Everything's falling apart. Tony Atlas shows up as the Black Superman. Ricky Steamboat works a date for them. Iron Sheik works for them. George Scott is the booker.
Yes.
Did Vince send George Scott to be the booker for Fritz?
No.
Because this was after he had worked for Vince, but the fact that Ricky Steamboat worked there while he was still working for the WWF.
Don't you remember when George Scott got the job as Leroy McGurk's booker in the dying days of his end of the vast Mid-South territory, and Jimmy Snuka was working in fucking McGurk in like Springfield, Missouri.
82.
Jimmy Snuka, Paul Jones. A lot of guys were loyal to George Scott. George Scott had been, for all those years in the Carolinas, as the booker of the Crockett territory. But before that, for years, George Scott was a well-respected wrestler, and he got booking positions. He knew all the promoters. I never saw what the fucking appeal of this guy was, but I never met him until 1989. So maybe 20 years beforehand, he was good. I've also heard that, in the Carolinas, he was the booker, but you had top talent from one end to the other, from the Wahoo McDaniels to the Johnny Valentines to the Blackjack Mulligans, that knew all their own angles and knew how to get themselves over and had opponents out the ass that they could bring in and draw money with. So a lot of times being a good booker is as much putting together the best team and letting them run their plays as it is, calling the shots. But no, Vince didn't send him. George Scott, after the run with Crockett, when he got replaced there, for the next few years, he was going where he could go. You don't leave the Carolinas and go book for Leroy McGurk, especially in 1982, unless that's the only job you could get for whatever fucking reason. And then he got the job with Vince because, once again, he'd been around forever and he knew everybody. And he and Vince had the blow up after WrestleMania because, as George Scott has said, and I don't blame him for this, he didn't want all that cartoon bullshit wrestling. He was embarrassed by it. And he and Vince didn't have the same promotional philosophy. But at that point, then, Fritz Von Erich, a guy who had known George Scott. George Scott had worked with Fritz Von Erich before in the fucking Buffalo territory back in the late 50s, early 60s. I think they'd probably been down to Texas sometime. But here's the Von Erich territory on its ass, desperate. here's a guy who's had a major name as a booker and has contacts with some top talent that will still come in and do him favors. So yes, they hire him, and he brings in Ricky Steamboat, and he brings in the Iron Sheik. Same thing as he did in '89. But he also brought in Bam Bam Bigelow and made him a fucking Russian.
Crusher Yurkov.
Yes, Crusher Yurkov. Wonder whose little fucking wink, wink, nod, nod that was. So when you want to talk about behind the times bookers, George Scott is an example of that, in that he was not still using the same promotional philosophies in 1987, 88, 89 as he was in 1974. He was using the actual same talent. He's the one that brought the Iron Sheik back and signed him to WCW for $100,000. They used him for 2 months on TV and sent him home because he was the shits. And then they forgot about him, so his contract rolled over, and they fucking had to pay him for $100,000 for another year. So they brought him back to TV to do jobs, thinking they'd run him off. And he said, "Fuck it, I'll do all the jobs for $100,000 you want." And his jobs were so rotten, they sent him back home, paid him the extra $100,000. That was all George Scott fallout. He's the one that brought Blackjack Mulligan back for a week because he felt, well, nobody's going to fuck with Jack Mulligan. These wrestlers are going to do what he says. And Blackjack showed up and was like, "This is a fucking zoo," and turned around and left after a week. So yes, all those guys came in because it was George Scott. He had a reputation and he had made relationships, but he had fallen apart. And the last several runs of his career were in dying territories because that was the only place he could get on.
My point with the Vince question was Steamboat was still under contract to Vince. It wasn't like he was an independent guy doing a favor for George Scott, which is what he did a couple of years later after he left the NWA, South Atlantic Pro Wrestling, which became the NAWA, right? Maybe it's the other way around. It was the NAWA and it became South Atlantic Pro Wrestling.
Yeah, it was the NAWA when George Scott was with them, and then they lost a money guy and changed over and changed talent and became South Atlantic.
That's right. But Steamboat worked there during George Scott's run, but he wasn't under contract to anybody.
Yeah, but, well, same thing. If it had been a mass invasion of a bunch of WWF talent, there'd be one thing. But George Scott was Vince's booker within a year beforehand, probably called up Pat Patterson, one of the bookers to one of the bookers, one of the boys to one of the boys. Steamboat wants to do it. He's my friend. Can you let him off for a date? I'm having trouble down here. It was a charity booking.
Well, before we wrap things up, to circle back to the question, other than Hulk Hogan, who do you think would have been a good pick to play the wrestler Thunderlips in Rocky III?
Oh, God. I mean, the way that the part was written, a big, blonde, flamboyant giant, there was, if you were going to go with the way that the part was written, Hogan would have been the guy. But if you'd have gone for a beast, a beast wouldn't be named Thunderlips, but if you'd have gone for a beast of some kind, any of the big fucking guys, Terry Funk was already in the business. I bet he would have had a heck of a fucking little match with Sylvester Stallone. As the part was written and visually, it had to be pretty much Hogan. Can you think of anybody else that looked like that at that time?
If you wanted a giant blonde guy, Big John Studd would have been an option.
But see, then he didn't have the body that Hogan had. He definitely didn't look like a guy named Thunderlips, and he probably, honestly, would have been harder for Stallone to work with.
It's interesting they didn't go with Terry because of the relationship with Stallone. I think he's one of the people that recommended Hogan.
Yeah, but see, there's the thing again. Terry Funk, you wouldn't call him Thunderlips, and he's not a giant. Then the part would have had to been written that Sylvester Stallone fights this crazy, wild, psychotic wrestler.
Who came up with Thunderlips? That's the thing.
Whoever wrote the script, that's what I'm saying.
We need a wrestler. What's his name? Thunderlips.
That's what I'm saying. Wrestling has become like Hollywood in that they don't find a talent and write a part for him. They write a part and then find the talent. And that's fine for Hollywood, but not for wrestling.
Okay, Jim, final question this week. This one's coming from me. Recently, news broke out that T. Joe Khan has passed away.
Oh, no.
Any memories of T. Joe Khan, and who do you think was the worst member of Paul Jones's army?
Oh, good God. Well, first of all, T. Joe Khan, how old was he?
Well, I don't have that in front of me. How
did you hear about this?
A couple weeks ago, people started posting that T. Joe Khan passed away.
For everybody out there, and I'm not knocking this guy that's saying who, it's because he didn't wrestle very long. But he was part of Crockett Promotions during a hot period. I can't remember what his real name was. But he wrestled as Teijo Khan, Teijokhan. He was kind of an Oriental martial arts gimmick guy. And he was a good athlete, had a good physique. He worked for Crockett some underneath on the card. Then when they bought Kansas City, they sent him out there along with Big Bubba Rogers and some of the other guys that were underneath for Crockett that were still good workers and could blossom out there in Kansas City for the time that they had that territory. I think he worked Florida in the same way, and then did independence for a few years. Might have been in WCW a brief period of time, but from
64 years old, by the way.
And older than me. I would, he started later. He started later in his life then, I would guess, because I don't think he started till like 85-ish. So he would have been almost 30 and wrestled until maybe actually he might have been in the WWF at some point, that late 80s, early 90s period. I don't think wrestled much after the early 90s. I hadn't seen or heard of him in quite some time. But he was a nice guy in the locker room and a good worker. He just, he wasn't around long and didn't get featured very, very much. I hate to hear that.
He was also one of the cannibals in a movie I love, Body Slam. The Barbarian and T. Joe Khan were Axe and Hammer, the cannibals, managed by Captain Lou Morano.
Yes, and guess who that might have been? Yeah, that's right. And that was, we've told the story when Barbarian was out there filming the movie and got in trouble in the hotel bar. Teijo Khan, but Teijo was a laid back guy. He was very, laid back and nice and friendly, quiet, and, did his thing. I don't have a ton of memories of specifically this great match or whatever. It's been so long and I haven't thought of him, but, he was a nice guy. I guess 64 isn't old enough to be dying, but it's not young enough to be shocking, I guess. I'm in that period of time now myself. Not old enough to be ready to die, but not young enough to where it's shocking.
He was a member of Paul Jones's army as well as the House of Guleen.
Oh, and that's right. And he worked in Memphis and was managed by Mark Guleen. That was what, like 86-ish?
87.
87. Okay, see, I'm close. Who else was in he was not the worst member of Paul Jones's army, but who else was in? Poor old Pez Whatley, when they made him Shaska Whatley and he was wearing the tux hat and the tails. Teijo Khan, Barbarian was in there. I love Barb. He was a great talent, but it
Baron
seemed
von
like
Raschke.
Poor Baron. He was about, well.
Eddie, what are you going to say was in the group? Is poor this guy? Oh, this guy.
Well, Baron was about ready to retire then. He was just about at the end of his career. And, and he was a big name in the business, but they just put everybody, it seemed like that Paul Jones's army was the catch-all. And I think Dusty did it that way on purpose because Paul had the never-ending feud with Handsome Jimmy Valiant. And at that point, Jimmy was so over, but he was doing almost nothing in the ring. And the whole complete style of, Crockett Promotions had changed with the Midnight Express and the Rock and Roll Express and the Road Warriors and Flair and the Horsemen and Dusty and Magnum and all those. And then, Handsome, I love Handsome. He was one of my first favorites from the time I saw him on Bruiser's TV, but he was a personality, but his matches were not getting the 6 Tokyo Dome stars, right? So Dusty would program Paul Jones and his men against Handsome, and he'd keep all of those matches kind of contained in one spot on the card where it could draw money and it didn't have to be a good match. Does that make any sense? And it did draw money, and the matches weren't any good. But yeah, I don't think T-Joe was the worst member of the group, but I hate to knock any of those people. It was a motley band, and Paul Jones was a big name as a wrestler in the Carolinas and Florida and Georgia, but he wasn't a good manager. It just didn't translate ever for me and for a lot of people. So
what about the Mighty Wilbur?
There's the worst member of Paul Jones when he brought in the Mighty Wilbur.
And then he started calling him Puddinhead and upset him. What the hell was going on there?
And by the way, for those people wondering, well, why the fuck were they booking Paul Jones as a manager? Paul Jones was factored in. He was grandfathered in because of his dedication to the Crockett territory for so long, going back to Jim Crockett Sr., that Paul Jones, Klondike Bill, George Harris, and one or two other people were going to be around in some capacity as long as Crockett was around. And this is evidenced by the fact that once Crockett sold, they brought George Scott in, who was good friends with George Scott, Paul Jones. Paul Jones was dropped as a manager and became an agent. And when George Scott was fired, Paul Jones was not used as an agent anymore.
Now, it has been said by certain people that work there that Paul Jones may have had the reputation for being a stooge for the office when he was a manager for Crockett.
Is that a question or just a blanket statement?
I was making a statement, but I specifically said it so it could be taken either way, as a question or a statement.
Well, I mean, it depends on the definition of the word stooge.
Turns around, runs to the phone, calls the office, and tells them what's going on.
Paul was good friends with the Booker and good friends with Crockett and good friends with Crockett Sr. and was always figured in there, and that was his home, and he lived in Charlotte, and he was taking care of the company. And if people were doing things that possibly he figured weren't good for the business, or possibly they needed to be moved out of a spot that he might be moved into, or whatever the case, he might in some cases. And Paul was a fairly straight guy. He was older at the time. He was in his 40s at least. He wasn't out partying and drinking and doing the Peruvian blow and all the other stuff. So I don't think he just hid and waited behind bushes to gather evidence on people, but I have a feeling him being a straight guy and sort of an unofficial member of the office at that point, that if some of the guys were doing things, he'd probably mention it.
Was there ever a stooge that did hide behind bushes and just looked to always gather dirt on people? And
that fucking George Scott's son, that no good Byron Scott, I've never heard Bobby Eaton talk bad about people. He hated that fucking kid because it looked like he was on heroin. He was on something. It was obvious. And it looked like, and he would actually walk around in the locker room and start leaning sideways so his left ear would be closer to your conversation as he walked past. And Bobby would look up, stooge. He hated him. And that's when they brought in Strongbow's son,
Mark Young.
Yeah, no, Vincent Young.
Vincent Young. He became Mark Young, I think, in the WWF.
Yes, but Vincent Young, he was a break dancer, and the people laughed it out of the building. But George Scott was friends with Strongbow from years before, so he brought it. But that Byron Scott, yeah, he looked like he was on heroin all the time. He was a stooge, just straight out. He was slimy looking fuck, and Bobby Eaton didn't like him. And if Bobby Eaton didn't like you, there was something the matter with you. So that whole time period there was a lot of potential stooges going on. But you notice whenever you said, well, who really was a stooge, I instantly named George Scott's son.
Let's wrap things up. Of course, you can hear the drive-thru when it premieres next Monday with a review of AEW's, what is it, Full Gear? Full Gear!
Yeah.
Next Monday here on the drive-thru.
It's full, all right. Full of something.
Of course, you can hear the Jim Cornette Experience when it debuts Friday, wherever you find your favorite podcast. Hear classic episodes of The Experience and the Drive-Thru by becoming a patron. Patreon.com/Cornette. For only $5 a month, you get access to the archives with another batch of episodes added each and every Sunday evening. Join today, patreon.com/Cornette. The official Jim Cornette YouTube channel, tinyurl.com/official Corny YouTube, or just go to YouTube and search for Jim Cornette for full episodes, clips of episodes, and omnibus collections, all with the fantastic and exclusive Travis Heckel artwork. The official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. Be one of the 170,000 subscribers on our march to 1 million. The official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. You can follow Jim on Twitter at the Jim Cornette. You can follow me on Twitter at Great Brian Last. You can hear me on the 605 Superpodcast at 605pod.com. Available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Don't forget the holidays are fast approaching. Cornette's Collectibles at jimcornette.com for DVDs, books, autographed photos, autographed restraining orders, burger towels, face masks, and there's always so much more.
Always.
Cornette's Collectibles at jimcornette.com. The drive-thru is brought to you by the Law Office of Stephen P. New, 888-692-8084. Get even with Stephen at newlawoffice.com. But until Friday on The Experience, and next week back on Monday, right back here on the drive-thru, for Jim Cornette, I'm the Great Brian Last. Tally-ho!